Before we jump in, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. It seriously helps the channel grow. All right, let's get started.
During an expedition into mysterious ancient ruins, Luffy suddenly vanishes, leaving the Straw Hats frantic and desperate to find him. Instead of answers, they're pulled into something far more unsettling: Luffy's own memories. Trapped in the past with no clear way out, the crew is forced to relive moments from Luffy's childhood, moments he never shared and never planned for them to see. As they witness his early life, his bond with Ace, and the pain and loneliness hidden behind his usual grin, the Straw Hats come face to face with the emotional scars that shaped their captain. The journey becomes less about rescue and more about understanding, as each memory challenges how they see Luffy and their role in his life. Blending friendship, hurt, comfort, and deep emotional introspection, this long, heartfelt fic explores brotherhood, trauma, and unconditional loyalty, showing that some memories are buried not because they're forgotten, but because they hurt too much to share. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Daughter of the Sea by Kuchiachi.
Chapter 11, Bond of Brothers. The memory faded away once again and the Straw Hats were all staring ahead of them at the darkness, all of them suddenly feeling sick with themselves for watching something so private. First with Sabo's death and now this tearful vow the two brothers made to each other, they wished that they could forget all about it and pretend not to have seen anything, but it was impossible. The one in the worst shape was probably Usopp. He was sitting on the ground, his hands now rummaging through his bag, trying to find something to distract him, but he couldn't stop his mind from thinking about it. Luffy had wanted to become the king of the pirates ever since he promised Shanks, this he knew, but it was really Sabo's death did his captain become determined to really fulfill it. Ace and Luffy had a vow that they would one day become free, and now Luffy was the only one left who still carried that vow. Usopp just couldn't begin to imagine how heavy a burden that must be like. He and Luffy may not have spoken about it, but they both dreamt of meeting up with Shanks's crew someday, Luffy for Shanks, and himself for his father. More than anything else, when Usopp does finally meet his father, he wanted to stand in front of him as a brave warrior and a great pirate like he was. He supposed his biggest ambition was for his father to be proud of him. Before he met Luffy, Zoro and Nami, he didn't know what he wanted out of his life, but after they helped him to protect his home village, he was inspired to go out to sea and become a pirate. When Luffy asked him along, it meant more to him than anything. He wanted to pinch himself to make sure it wasn't a dream. Who would have thought that going with him would change him like this? He wouldn't be where he was right now if it wasn't for that one spur-of-the-moment decision. But seeing Luffy and Ace make this vow with such conviction in their voices when they had been just small children made him feel ashamed. That one moment was more than anything he was. After his mother died, he stayed where he was and only played pirate with the village children. Could he have become that strong if he started working at it from them? Zoro and Sanji were proof of that. They didn't have devil fruit abilities, and he knew that even if Luffy never ate the gum fruit, he'd still be horribly strong. All three of them are monsters after all. But, as for himself, he just kept running through the village day after day shouting out lies. He stared long and hard at the arsenal and gadgets in his bag. All these things, these weapons that he carried with him, none of them made him feel any braver. How did Luffy do it? How is it that Luffy always managed to stay so happy about everything? Why wasn't he ever afraid after everything that's happened to them? He felt his face cringe and he gritted his teeth together in a poor attempt to hold back the tears. How does he do it? He asked out loud, forgetting that the rest of his crew was there. Do what? Nami asked him confused. How does he keep going forward with everything that's happened to him? He asked, hiding his face from them. If it were me, I'd have given up a long time ago. But he keeps going for the sake of his brothers, doesn't he? I think that's just what makes him strong, Sanji said, pulling his cigarette out grimly, because he owes it to them to live. If he were to die before he fulfilled that vow, he'd never be able to rest in peace. For him, dying would be like spitting in their faces, and making a mockery of their sacrifices, Zoro said softly. But, Usopp said, looking up at him. He just believes in the future, Robin said softly, even if it's like a castle of sand, he just keeps going because he knows he has to. Frankie burst out crying, man, that pulls at the heartstrings. What's the deal with you guys doing this to me? I think I feel a song coming up. I'm already ahead of you, Frankie-san, Brooke cried, strumming the guitar and began to sing out. Every time the rain no longer falls, and I see the sky, I think back to when I was a child, who could only cry. Robin, Zoro interrupted them, didn't you say before that you had an idea where we were? How could you interrupt, Zoro-san? Brook cried as Zoro ignored him as he and the rest of the crew looked to Robin. Yeah, you did say that we've been in a place like this before, Nami agreed, rubbing her red eyes. I think I would remember if we were. Robin nodded. But we have, she said, don't any of you remember? Shortly before we went to Skypia we stopped by another island. One called Ruluka. Ruluka, Usopp whispered, thinking back, oh, yeah. That was the place with all those ridiculous taxes. His eyes suddenly widened as he realized what Robin was hinting at. Wait. You talking about the Rainbow Mist? Exactly, Robin nodded. It appears we are now in a place just like that. The Rainbow Mist? Brooke and Frankie asked together in confusion. Sounds like a wild place, Frankie muttered, thinking it over. It was pretty, Chopper said, thinking back to how he and Sanji were at shore watching the sparkling mist that was made up of every color he could think of. It truly did get the right name. I remember how you guys went inside it and then just disappeared. Disappeared? Brooke asked in amazement. That sounds like an amazing trick. It was no trick, Robin explained, we ended up getting trapped there and were lucky to escape. The Rainbow Mist is a mysterious fog that is actually a gateway to another dimension. Another dimension? Brooke whispered in awe. That's right, Nami whined, thinking back to all the treasure that she found there on those shipwrecks. I remember all the treasure that was left behind. You would be upset about that, Usopp snapped, we were almost trapped there for good. It went by several different names, Robin went on. Any ship who enters the Rainbow Mist is automatically transported to the dimension known as Apes Concert, in which all ships and their crews and passengers are trapped inside. It's most commonly known as the ship's graveyard. And you've seen it? Brooke asked in astonishment. I've heard many stories about such a place, but I never believed that it actually existed. Ship's graveyard, Frankie said to himself. He could imagine what such a place would be, a final resting place for ships. It must be a sight to see. It was only through luck that we made it out before the pathway closed, Robin informed them. Time there moved differently than it did in the outside world. There was a group of kids who had been trapped there for decades, but when we met them, they had barely aged a day. They didn't even realize that they had been there for years. That place was a limbo. But what does that have to do with what's going on here? Zoro asked in annoyance. Remember when Sanji and Frankie both came running back when they went off to look for a way out? Robin asked him. It's just like how Apes Concert was. Somehow, in this place, it is a space loop, which means it takes anyone back to the point in from which they started. Before, I remember firing a cannonball from the front of the ship only for it to land behind us when we were in the mist. I believe that we are trapped in a place similar to that. So this is Apes Concert? Chopper asked, looking around at the darkness. It's creepier than I thought it would be. Not as creepy as that ship's graveyard was, Nami disagreed. It doesn't look anything like where we were before. But if Robin's right about it, then it would explain how you guys kept coming back. But how did you guys get out of there in the first place? Frankie asked. Yeah, we can get out the same way. Brooke agreed happily. But Robin was shaking her head. That was different as well. We saw the way out thanks to the setting sun, it showed us which way to go. However, it was the explosion that gave us that final leap. Explosion, Brooke repeated, thinking it over for a second before he screamed. Were you trying to kill yourselves? I always did wonder what happened to that place, Robin said thoughtfully. I mean, time and space were disrupted thanks to us. Dude, just what kind of trouble were you all getting yourselves into? Frankie yelled alarmed. So we just have to blow this place up? Usopp asked them, truly having enough of this weird place anyway. Hang on, Nami cried, before they got too into the idea, we don't know what will happen. We could end up getting trapped here for good if we do something that crazy. And let's not forget that we still don't have the slightest idea to where Luffy is. We have to find him first before we get out. And the sooner we do, the happier I'll be. You can count on my Nami, my love. Sanji cried out, hearts in his eyes as he gazed at her. And I mean now, she yelled angrily at him. Great, but how do you suggest we do that? Zoro asked. If we can't go anywhere, then how are we gonna find that rubber idiot? But it was like this place didn't want them to look for Luffy or a way out. It faded again so that they were back in Luffy's memories, after which, they couldn't bring themselves to stop watching. Damn, Frankie said, looking around at the trees, disappointed that he didn't get a chance to use the rockets in his shoulders to blow something up. What's going on now? Chopper asked, wondering just what they were going to see now. They quickly spotted Luffy and Ace leaning up against some trees in the clearing, but to their surprise, they weren't alone. Garp was there with them, drinking heavily. Not what I expected, Usopp said nervously, they look almost calm.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
I was thinking that he was going to start training them again. In other words, try to kill them, Sanji summarized for him. I think that Garp might have heard about Sabo, Zoro informed them, looking at the grim look in Garp's eyes. They fell silent at that. Yes, that would be enough to stop Garp's abusive behavior. As rough and hard-headed as Garp was, even he knew that there was a time and place for that. As if answering their question, Garp pulled the bottle from his lips and sighed heavily. I see, he said, in an unusually soft voice. So that squirt's really gone. Luffy sniffled a little, but his eyes were dry. It's Sabo, he said tightly, not Squirt. Yeah, he had a name you know, Ace agreed crossly. Garp gazed at his grandsons. Normally he'd tell them off or hit them for their rudeness, but given the circumstances, it seemed as if he would let it go for now. I'm sorry for that, he said tilting his head back again. I'm surprised at how respectful he's being, Brook said hoarsely. He's rough around the edges, but I think he does have a soft spot, even if he is insane, Nami said quietly, also sitting down with Usopp as she watched the scene with sad eyes. Sabo deserves this much at least. I don't get why it had to happen like that, Ace said to no one in particular. It just doesn't make sense. So he was in front of those noble ships, he didn't do anything. Dogrid just said that he saw them fire at him. I don't doubt that, Garp answered him grimly, a tiny boat against that galleon. It wouldn't have stood a chance. That's just the type of people the celestial dragons are. Why don't you arrest them? Luffy asked, looking up at him angrily, the guys who did it. You can do that right. They killed Sabo for no reason. Unfortunately, the Marines work for the celestial dragons, Sanji said in disgust. He can't do anything like that. They have the whole world tied to a string. I'm afraid I can't, Garp told Luffy, a sad look in his eyes. But why? Luffy demanded, jumping up and staring at him. You always say that Marines uphold justice and arrest bad people. So arrest the ones who killed Sabo. This is just cruel, Usopp choked, tears coming again. They want justice for their brother, Robin sighed. They accepted the fact that Sabo's dead, but they want to see the ones who killed him to pay. But they know that nothing that can be done about it. It would be hard for anyone to swallow. Their promise to go out to sea did help them with the pain, but it won't be enough to make it go away. It's only natural that we want those who hurt us to suffer for it. But here they're up against someone they can't win against, Nami added, laying her cheek against her hand. Dayton was right. They'd get themselves killed. Even a marine hero like Garp is helpless against the world nobles. I would if I could, Garp went on, laying the empty bottle beside him. I don't like the celestial dragons either, but there's nothing I can do here. Huh, I knew that marines are useless, Ace snapped at him. You got that right, kid, Zoro agreed. All that crap about justice and peace is nothing but crap, isn't it? Ace demanded hotly. There wasn't even a body by the time they were through firing. They fired Sabo's ship until there wasn't anything left. The Straw Hats cringed at the thought. The attack must have been truly horrific if not even the wreckage of a ship remained. If they never found a body, Chopper said quietly, do you think that there's a chance that Sabo might still be alive? That he could have escaped? I doubt it, Sanji said, shaking his head. I'd like to think that, believe me, I think that would be amazing if that's what happened. But if he was still alive, then why didn't he ever once try to get in contact with Luffy and Ace? Even if it's just a quick message. He surely would have known they would hear about the attack and think he was dead. He could have done something just to let them know that he was okay and not to worry about him during all these years. He could have been protecting them. Usopp offered, but even to him, the lie sounded pathetic. Maybe, Zoro said, but I find that unlikely. I don't remember ever hearing about a pirate like him before, and as far as I'm aware of, he didn't show up at Marineford to help Ace. You think that if he was alive and heard that his brother was in trouble, he'd sit back and not do anything? If he is still alive, then he must have given up his dream of being a pirate or forgotten about his brothers. No, I doubt that there's any way he's still out there. If he was, can you imagine the look on Luffy-san's face? Brook sighed wistfully, it would be such a heartwarming scene. No point in worrying about it now, Robin said softly. I think a part of Luffy might have held onto that hope for a while, but it's been 12 years since then. I'm sure he must have made peace with that idea by now. She frowned to herself. It was Ace's death that she was concerned about. It was a small mercy, but Luffy never had to watch Sabo's death. He wasn't haunted at the sight of seeing him die. Her eyes saddened. Saul. Though she only knew him for a short time, he will always hold a special place in her heart. Even after over 20 years, his death still tormented her. As she looked at the child Ace, she knew that his death was very different from Sabo's. Luffy only spent a few months with him at most, but the bond that he had with Ace was much stronger. They spent years together and Ace died in front of him. That had to mess with his head and it saddened her greatly to wonder just what her captain had gone through. Gramps, Ace suddenly asked, why would they do something like that? Sabo didn't do anything to deserve it. Why can they get away with doing this but the rest of us can't? They could see that Garp looked uncomfortable, as if wondering how he could explain it. The Straw Hats knew that he didn't have any more say in this than they did. How were you to explain to two young boys that the reason that their brother's murderer won't ever answer to his crimes was because they didn't answer to anyone? They all knew that the reason that the celestial dragons could get away with their cruel and murderous habits was because they knew that they could. But how could he explain that one? Garp stared off ahead before he finally answered, humans are complicated creatures, and that's what makes them human. I think I've heard that saying somewhere in the South Blue. It's something I often thought about when faced with a situation like this. Everyone wants to get stronger, but without a purpose for that strength, they don't know what to do with it, and often find ways to take it out on others in a bad way. I don't get it, Luffy said predictably. He means that power has a bad way of getting you to misuse it when you don't have a good purpose for it, Sanji said sourly. Perhaps the celestial dragons were good rulers a few hundred years ago, but they lost sight of it all since then, Nami sighed. Personally, I doubt there was any humanity in them to begin with, Frankie said angrily. Garp continued to look up at the bright blue sky. A pair of seagulls were flying overhead as he said softly, "Humans are complicated, that's what makes us human. In other words, I guess there'll always be a part of us that fears change even when we need it most." He may not be good with words, Robin said softly, but he does know how to get to the point. What are you talking about? Ace demanded fiercely, not getting it. I don't know for sure what that means myself, Garp answered sadly, but I think it means that sometimes you just have to accept things the way they are. There was silence for a moment. The Straw Hats all knew that feeling all too well. Just sit back and let something go even when it felt like going against everything you ever believed in. The very idea made them all feel hollow, alone. Revenge helped to ease that hollowness. I can't accept this, Ace said angrily, turning his back on him as Luffy watched them both miserably. But there's nothing that can be done about it, Garp sighed. Believe me, if I could, I'd arrest them and make them pay for what happened. But there's nothing that anyone can do when faced with the celestial dragons. So they can do whatever the hell they want to us, and if we fight back we get killed for it. Ace yelled, how is that fair? Life isn't fair, but that's life, Garp said looking at them both firmly, and even if you could do something about it, what good would it do? Luffy and Ace both blinked in surprise. He makes a fair point, Brook said, looking down. If he still had a face, they would have been able to see his completely miserable expression. A life, once gone, can never be brought back. Of course, what happened with me was the one exception to that rule. I mean, Garp went on, even with all the strength and influence in the world, you can't bring Sabo back. Not even justice can do that. I know that, Ace yelled, before sitting back down angrily, his hands curled into fists, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. Ace, Luffy said sadly as Garp stood up. I'll let this go for now, he said, turning back and heading through the trees where they could just make out the bandit's house. But next time I come here, we'll begin training again. Oh, God, Usopp whispered, sweating a little at the thought. I hurt just thinking about it. Luffy waited until his Gramps was out of his sight before he went over to Ace's shaking form. Ace, he asked worriedly, why should we be Marines? Ace demanded, his bangs hiding his eyes. Why does he want us to join them so badly? What's so special about them anyway? It sounds like all they do is protect people like the nobles. If being a Marine means that I have to work for the same people who killed Sabo, then I'll never join. The memory faded then and there. I see now why they fought so hard against the idea of being Marines, Brook said softly. But Ace was right, Sanji said angrily. The Marines are no more than pets to the nobles. How could anyone work for someone who killed someone you cared about? Nami looked down, remembering how painful it had been for her to work for the same monster that took her mother from her. Her hand went to her tattoo as she thought how she was forced to work for Arlong, how that awful tattoo he forced her to get, wearing that disgusting mark made it feel as if he owned her, like she was his property. She hated every moment of that, even now she felt sick at the thought. She could swear that getting stabbed in the heart would have hurt less than having to be forced to smile every time she looked at him. She shook her head hard, trying to rid herself of those thoughts. It didn't matter anymore, she was free from that life. But at the same time she could understand where Ace was coming from. Why didn't the Marines ever come for her in her village? They were forced to survive on their own for 8 long years, without any hope that someone would come and save them. And by the time they finally did come, they were paid off by Arlong to steal all the money that was going to buy their freedom. Her eyes narrowed. Yes, she agreed with Ace completely, she wouldn't ever join the Marines after that. The memory came back and they had to blink several times to realize what they were seeing wasn't a hallucination. At first, they didn't recognize it, but when they realized that they were standing on the edge of the forest, with the giant wall that led to Edge Town in the distance, it could only be one place. Is this? Chopper asked, staring around them, unable to believe what he was seeing. It is. This is the Gray Terminal, Robin answered grimly, or rather, what's left of it. It was a barren wasteland, the ground was covered in nothing but a thick layer of ash and burnt pieces of metal. The whole air smelled richly of charcoal, almost like a giant bonfire. The mountains of trash were now replaced with all this, plains of dust. While it was an improvement in many ways, they felt sick at the thought of how it was created. Shows just how enormous that fire was, Frankie said, taking off his glasses to get a better look. Anything that wasn't destroyed was probably cleaned up by the guards and dumped somewhere else where they couldn't see it. I just can't stand it, Nami whispered, shaking in anger, fighting the urge to be sick. Chopper wasn't any better, he was crying hard at the thought of all those poor people. Just how did these guys sleep at night? Did the ones who come in to clean this place kill any survivors? Or was the fire so great that there wasn't anything left? He just didn't know anymore. There were footsteps behind them and they looked to see the two boys coming out of the forest and walking through the ash. There was so much that they were soon covered with it head to foot. They didn't say anything as they followed the two, staring around in horror. Hard to believe that this used to be the Grey Terminal, Ace said looking around. His expression didn't show any emotion, but his eyes were filled with anger at what happened here. There's nothing left. I'm so glad that they made it out of that, Chopper sighed, that was terrible. Ace look, Luffy called, pointing a ways away. They looked up in time to see that a few giant carts were coming through the gates. Ace pulled Luffy back a little ways to make sure that the guards couldn't see them.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
What's with the carts? Luffy asked innocently. Wait, Sanji said, looking furious. Don't tell me. What's wrong, Sanji? Nami asked, but before he could answer they heard the sounds of crashing and bangs. It was from when the guards there were dumping garbage back near the front gates. They're still dumping trash here. Chopper screamed out. I don't believe them. Frankie yelled. After what they did they're filling it back up. He wasn't the only one outraged. It's only been a week, and they're already starting to fill up again. Ace yelled. Wasteful, Sanji growled, now chewing on his cigarette. What bastards. At this rate, it's all going to look the same as it did before the fire, Usopp said, thinking of Trash Mountain. It'll look just like before. And not just like before, Robin said, her eyes void of all emotion. It will be like the fire never happened. Garp was right, humans never change even when they need to. They won't set another fire like before when it fills up, will they? Luffy asked worriedly, taking hold of Ace's arm. Most likely, Zoro said grumpily. Why not? If they think it works then they'll do it again if they have to. I don't know, Ace admitted, looking down at him, but in any case, we should avoid this place as often as we can in the future, let's not get into another mess like last time. In fact, I think that it's good that we avoid Goa for a while too. His hands were curled into fists again. Just thinking about them makes me want to break something. I mean, just look at this place. He held his arms wide out to mean the Grey Terminal, and they all nodded with him. You think they would at least leave it like how they created it? Nami said furiously. But they're falling right back into their disgusting habit of throwing their garbage out like this. So long as it doesn't bother their status or their places in High Town, I don't think they care, Brook told her. You know, Luffy said, as Ace grabbed hold of his arm and tugged him back through the jungles. I remember Grandpa saying that if there's one thing that people've been good at, it's destruction. You don't know the half of it, Robin whispered, thinking of how much death and pain had been caused by wars over the years. Ace sighed, that I can believe, but there has to be a limit. They all gazed sadly at each other as Ace led Luffy back through the forest. Humans are strange creatures, Robin said, we never learn from our mistakes. She stared long and hard at the two boys as she became lost in thought. There had to be a limit to what you can sacrifice in the name of justice. Most Marines follow absolute justice when it comes to prosecuting those who violate the government's laws. But their policy of absolute justice makes them seem worse than the very evil that they claim to fight. Ace was right, there had to be a limit. Suddenly they were in the clearing where they had once trained with Sabo. In fact, the old scoreboard was still there with the remains of chalk on it. As if Sabo had only just erased the scores from the day before and were now starting over fresh. Both boys were facing each other, both of them getting ready to charge the other. Don't know why they bother, Nami sighed. Luffy said so himself that he was never once able to beat Ace. Never, Brook asked in wonder. Luffy's a monster, Usopp said deadpan. So it only makes sense that his big brother was an even bigger monster. Some people just never learn, Frankie laughed. Alright, Ace yelled out, let's settle this. Luffy was the first to charge ahead. Here I come, Ace. He shouted, pulling his fist back for the first attack. Ace just stood there with his arms folded, as if waiting to see what his little brother had up his sleeve. Luffy spun his arm around in circles the whole way before he screamed out, "Gum gum, pistol." And like they had seen countless times before, his fist flew straight as an arrow and towards Ace. Ace looked surprised for a brief moment before he moved out of the way at the last moment. For a second, there was a big smile on Luffy's face, proud that he had gotten his move to work, at least until his arm came flying back at him, striking him in the face, spinning him around, and falling flat on his back. Well, he's gotten better, Brook chuckled as they all laughed as well, feeling a little better watching something more lighthearted than the last few memories. But he still has a long way to go, Zoro grinned. The stronger that he gets, the stronger Ace will get. Ace burst out laughing at the sight of it. What the hell was that? He demanded, holding onto his stomach as he laughed. You call this a fight? No matter how much force you put into it, there's no point if you can't hit me. Harsh but true, Sanji smirked. Like a pistol, it's only dangerous if you know how to aim. I told you, rubber really isn't suitable for battle, Ace finished saying. Oh, he won't like that, Chopper said knowingly. And sure enough, Luffy was sitting up and yelling at Ace to shut up. What? Ace yelled, for some reason, also losing his temper. Are you trying to say I'm wrong? You're just an anchor who's immune to blows. Yeah, but no one likes being told they're weak, Usopp said, rubbing the back of his head. Don't make fun of my gum fruit. Luffy yelled, their heads so close that they were touching. It looked so much like how they argued after Luffy was saved from Porchemy that they almost expected Sabo to step between them and break them apart. One of these days I'm gonna make you cry. Luffy screamed out, after all, I've thought of a technique more powerful than pistol. Great, but can you hit something with it? Frankie asked, still laughing. Just then, they could have sworn they heard Sabo's voice saying, Luffy. Great job. Your arm stretched further than it did yesterday. You tell them, Sabo. Usopp said, before he realized what he said and froze. Wait, Sabo. Chopper cried out in disbelief as he turned to where the voice was, but there wasn't anything there. Sabo. Ace turned to point and called out, Sabo. You're far too easy on Luffy. I knew it. Luffy shouted out proudly, I really did become stronger than yesterday. Hey, Sabo. They called together, until they realized that they had been talking to a rock. What was that? Nami said, startled, I could have sworn I just heard Sabo speaking. See, Chopper said, pointing ahead of him with a hoof, Sabo is alive. No, I think that we just believed we did, Robin corrected gently. But if that wasn't Sabo, then who was it? Usopp demanded. We've been over this, Zoro said in annoyance. He's not coming back. Maybe Luffy-san was imagining hearing his brother so strongly that he truly believed that he heard him. Brook came up with, a dream. I guess that would be the best explanation, Nami said, thinking it over, the hope being punctured in her chest. But then how did Ace hear him? Chopper demanded. Do you see the kid anywhere? Sanji demanded. No. If Nami Swan says that we were dreaming, then we were. Zoro on the other hand was frowning as he thought it over. He remembered back to when he trained after Kuina died, how whenever he trained by himself, he could almost swear that there were times where he thought he could feel her watching him grow stronger. But he knew that was crazy, he was there at her funeral. She was gone, yet how could he sometimes feel her presence here? Was that a dream or something more? Both brothers were red in the face as they realized that they had shouted at a boulder. Luffy sighed as he walked a few feet away. Sabo was such a kind older brother, he said sadly. He really was, Chopper said, sitting down with Usopp and Nami. I wish I could have met him. But for some reason, Ace looked affronted and suddenly yelled at him, what's that supposed to mean? Are you saying you rather I died instead? Where'd he get that? Nami asked, almost falling over. I never said that, Luffy shouted back at him. But that's basically what you meant. Ace screamed back, and hit him hard on the head. I don't think he did, Chopper said in surprise. Oh, Luffy screamed out, rubbing the spot where Ace hit him. Sabo never punched me like that. What was that? He yelled back. What's with you? Luffy screamed out. Be a little nicer, will you? No way. And that was when they both lost it and began tearing at each other in a wrestling match. And they're going at it again, Nami sighed, rubbing her head in frustration. I'm beginning to wonder if Ace'll ever change. I think they're dealing with the stress of everything that's happened the only way they know how, Robin said, with fighting. Fair enough, Brook said, after all, most people would have lost their minds after experiencing so much all at once. All in all, I think they're dealing with it surprisingly well. The darkness came and went and soon they were back outside the bandits' house, only now there were two little huts standing next to it. It couldn't have been any clearer that the boys built them by themselves. While Ace's seemed stable enough, Luffy's looked second-hand and crooked, as if it could fall over at any second, but he seemed proud of it as he stood back and admired it. Why don't they go back to the hideout? Chopper asked. Too many memories, Robin answered simply as they watched the two place a couple signs over the entrance of each hut. She knew that they wouldn't want to go back to live in that tree house, as if nothing had happened. Especially since Sabo not only came up with the idea, but helped to build it. Suddenly, the boys were now putting up signs over the entrance of each little fort. One said, Ace's country, and the other, Luffy's country. Countries? Chopper asked as he watched Ace and Luffy throwing a couple crumbled up pieces of paper inside the bandits' house before they sat down in their little huts. When siblings are angry at each other, they often feel the need to draw a line between them, Robin laughed. In other words, anything on their side of the line belongs to them and the other isn't allowed to cross it. But that normally disappears once they calm down. I don't get it, Chopper said, shaking his head. I don't like seeing them fight like this. Just a way to give yourself some space, Sanji answered him, thinking back to all the times he had to leave the kitchen with all the other chiefs there yelling at each other. There's only so much of someone you can take before you snap. That's why you need some time to cool down and think things through. Dayton and the boys stepped out. What is it now? She asked them, staring from one to another. Luffy sat there with his arms folded and said firmly, I'm gonna learn how to survive on my own. You guys can be Dayton's country. I'm gonna borrow your bath every now and again, Ace added, before the two looked away from each other with an angry huff. Well, I wonder how long they're gonna fight this time, Frankie laughed as Dayton just sighed and went back inside. This is funny. I think Dayton has the right idea, just let them fight and deal with it on their own, Sanji said. I wouldn't worry. I know a thing or two about brothers. It always works out the same way, Frankie laughed. Siblings always argue, and they always march off on their own. But they always make up sooner or later, Brooke laughed, because it's no fun playing alone. Really? Good, Chopper said happily. The next memory was of the sky darkening overhead and the distant rumble echoing. A storm's coming, Nami said at once as she glanced up at the gray clouds, a pretty big storms too by the looks of it. I think it'd be good for them to stay in Dayton's house tonight. Those little huts won't do much. Look, Chopper yelled, pointing a little ways ahead of them to something that was moving ahead of them. Moving a little closer to see through the trees, they were taken aback to see what was happening. Usopp let out a startled shriek when he saw the Bear King, the Tiger Lord's equal, tower over Luffy, who was completely backed into a corner. Ace was watching from a tree overhead. Luffy held up his staff, his hands shaking a little, before he turned and called up to Ace, Ace. Help me out. It's the Bear King. Ah, Ace called, sounding much like how he did when they first met him. I thought you said you were gonna survive on your own, right? He's gonna regret doing that, Zoro said, knowing that this couldn't end well. Luffy always gets hurt even when someone's there to make sure he stays out of trouble. And he still can't throw a decent punch without missing. Luffy frowned at him, but still turned back to the bear. It roared as he stood over Luffy, holding up its large claws. Luffy cursed softly to himself before he decided to take a chance and jumped up to strike it with the staff. The bear swatted at him as if he were a fly, but Luffy was quick enough to dodge. But after he succeeded in getting in another hit was where Luffy pushed his luck. The bear struck at him again, but this time, it hit. Luffy didn't have time to dodge as the bear's claws came flying down at him. Luffy move! Sanji screamed out, but it was too late. Luffy's scream was swallowed whole as the bear's claws slashed across his small body and ripped him open so that blood was splattered everywhere, dyeing the clearing they were in a bright red. The Straw Hats all gasped, petrified at the damage they saw, as Ace lost his cool attitude completely and screamed out Luffy's name as the little boy hit the ground and didn't move. Ah, this is bad. Chopper screamed out as Ace jumped from the tree, not even bothering to grab his own staff, as he charged the bear. Chopper went running to Luffy to check the damage and stared horrified at it. Luffy's chest was completely torn open so that he could see inside him, blood was squirting out and the memory around them turned hazy and distorted. This is bad, Chopper screamed, and the others ran up to him as well. He's losing too much blood. At this rate he'll bleed to death in minutes. Ace attacked the bear with as much force as he could muster, but even his best punch didn't seem to do much effect except to annoy it. He doesn't have time to stay and fight. Usopp called, feeling himself turn sick at looking at Luffy. Ace obviously knew that as well as he kicked out at the bear's head and ran over. Luffy! Luffy! He screamed out desperately, holding up Luffy's head up in his arms. Luffy didn't move, his eyes cracked open slightly, but he seemed out of it as Ace stared around desperately, as if hoping that someone would appear and help. But no one did and the bear was coming back. So Ace did the only thing he could do. He grabbed Luffy and went running away from the bear, stopping only to grab the straw hat along the way. Is Luffy-san alright? Brooke gasped out, as they chased after them, Luffy leaving a trail of blood along the whole way. Usopp was hugging himself and cringing at the memory. Oh, it looked like it hurt so bad. He cried out shaking. Luffy was lucky that he wasn't killed, Robin said, though even she sounded scared. Don't say that, Usopp yelled at her. It's just lucky that Luffy's so strong even as a kid, Chopper cried out, trying to stay calm as he ran faster, trying to ignore the drops of blood every few feet. A normal human would have died from an injury like that almost at once. I knew he wasn't able to take that thing on. Zoro gritted his teeth together, feeling a strong surge of anger at Ace for not keeping a closer eye on Luffy. For crying out loud, when your little brother is asking for help, isn't that what you're supposed to do? What the hell was Ace thinking letting that idiot take that bear on? Didn't Ace say that the bear was as strong as the tiger? And it took all three of them to take that thing out. Anger clouds how we think, Brooke answered simply. Ace must have felt the blood dripping down because he suddenly stopped and turned to try and treat Luffy's injuries. He put his hands over the wound in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. Luffy, he cried out, sounding close to panicking, can you hear me? Already, Luffy was so pale that he was looking sickly. His face was covered with droplets of blood as he whimpered softly, forcing his eyes to look up at Ace. For a moment, it was as if he didn't even recognize him, but he blinked a few times and finally croaked out, I'm sorry, Ace. What's he apologizing for? He's the one hurt. Usopp cried out incredulously. But the look on Ace's face was as if Luffy had torn out his heart. He looked as if he was about to cry, but he didn't say anything as he carried him piggyback through the forest just as the rain came pouring down. Seriously, how bad is it, Chopper? Nami asked him, gasping for breath. Really bad, came his answer, wishing that he could do something to treat him right now. Ace might have known enough about medicine for basic first aid, but Luffy needed real medical attention. In record time, Ace had gotten back to the bandits' home and he hammered on the door. Hey, He screamed out, his eyes wide in panic. Anyone there in Dayton's country? Luffy's hurt. Please, someone help. It seemed to take an hour for the door to open, even though it was only a few seconds, and it was Magra who was there, looking out in confusion. As soon as he saw him, Ace seemed to become hysterical and he begged out, Magra. Please help, Luffy. Now, Magra said, startled as he stood back and let them in. Come in, quickly. Ace almost flew inside, leaving a large puddle of water with every step he took. I don't want to see, Nami said, shaking her head, thinking of the horrible wound and unable to bring herself to follow and watch them treat it. But I need to see it. Chopper said, the only one brave enough to go into the house and watch to see what was going on. The rest of them sat there silently as they waited for Chopper to come back out. Robin passed the time, holding her hands out to watch the rain fall through them without getting wet or cold. So strange, she whispered to herself. Usopp gulped a little before he asked them, that was hard to watch. He lives, Zoro answered him crossly, he doesn't even have a scar from all this. I know that Luffy's gonna be okay, Usopp snapped at him, but still, that wasn't easy to see. I mean, if I didn't know for a fact that Luffy pulls through, I would have said that he was dead. Look like our captain has had a livelier past than we ever thought, Robin said almost absent-mindedly. First there was what happened with Shanks, fighting the tiger, everything with Sabo and Blue Jam, as well as the fire. How could he not go crazy from all this? Nami demanded. He's always been like that, Sanji muttered, no matter what's happened, he hasn't changed a bit since the stubborn kid we've been watching. But that's not true, Usopp said, thinking it over, he's not the same person that he was before we were all separated 2 years ago. Haven't you noticed? Luffy-san is so much stronger than before, Brook said softly. He doesn't mean that, Zoro said, having noticed it long ago as well. He means that Luffy seemed to have changed since then, on the inside I mean. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something in him that's not the same anymore. Most likely to whatever happened on that battlefield, Robin agreed softly. Frankie frowned before he asked, did he ever tell any of you guys to what happened then? Not me, most of them said, but Usopp looked down sadly. He only ever mentioned that after Ace died, the reason he didn't completely lose it was because of Jinbei, he told them. When did he say that? Sanji asked in surprise. On Fishman Island when he was telling Kami that he really wanted to see Jinbei, he answered, Chopper heard it too. I wanted to know what he was talking about, but I couldn't bring myself to ask him. I don't remember him saying anything about that, Sanji said, thinking back. You were too busy drooling over the mermaids to listen, Usopp retorted with narrow eyes. I want to know exactly what happened there, but at the same time I'm terrified to know, Nami said softly, resting her chin on her knees. I just don't know what to do. I felt sick to myself for finding out how I did, Usopp confessed. There I was, only concerned about filling my face and then I got the paper and... He trailed off, still ashamed of himself. Once I heard about Ace's death, it tore me apart inside just thinking how much pain Luffy had to have been in. At that moment, I knew I had to get off that island even if it killed me. If I couldn't even be there to help support him, what right did I have to call myself a friend? I think we all felt the same way, Sanji said grimly. We all felt ashamed of ourselves for spending all that time lost on some islands in the middle of nowhere while our captain stormed Marineford. I think that we were all about ready to do some drastic things to get back to the Sunny. At least until I heard about Luffy going back to Marineford and sending us that message. It was Rayleigh who thought it through, Robin sighed. While I agree that it was for the best, these last 2 years hadn't been easy. Not for any of us, Zoro agreed, but at least this way we're strong enough to make sure that something like that won't happen again. I hope not, Nami whispered to herself just as Chopper came back out of the house, he was shaking. How is Luffy-san, Chopper-san? Brook asked him. Chopper came over to them and sighed, it was a serious injury like I said before. Magra's treating him now, but if that wound was just a little deeper, his heart could have been ripped out. Ouch, Sanji winced. He'll feel that in the morning. He's all bandaged up now, so we can see him, Chopper said, leading the way back. Slowly getting up from where they were, they all followed him, passing through the house. I think the other bandits are out, Chopper went on, he's the only person here. Good thing that he was here, Usopp said, moving past Frankie Girth so that he could get a close look at Luffy. Luffy was as pale as the sheet, covered head to foot in bandages, his face was contorted in pain as Magra dabbed at his forehead with a cool cloth. Zoro took one look at the child in the bed before glancing around the room. Sure enough, he spotted Ace huddled in a ball against the wall, his arms covering his face so that he couldn't see his expression, his shaking shoulders told him everything he needed to know. Magra had just finished dabbing at Luffy's head before he said, now, this is no joke. If the wound had been any deeper, he would have died. But he should be just fine, Chopper reassured his crew. I got a good look at him and he should recover soon. Given at how fast he heals. Magra turned to Ace, and asked, you three have always fought those wild beasts as a team, right? Ace was still shaking like a leaf and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. It's my fault, I thought I learned that fighting on your own doesn't prove that you're strong, but... He's crying, Chopper whispered as he stared at him, his own eyes wide. This was the first time he'd ever seen Ace cry. Even after they heard about Sabo, he never shed tears. Can you blame him? Brook asked sadly, gazing at Luffy. He must be feeling so guilty for this. But it wasn't his fault, Nami said automatically, her heart going out to him. Luffy shouldn't have tried to take that thing on his own. Nonetheless, Nami Swan, the sad thing is, it was his fault. It was his job to keep an eye on Luffy, Sanji said firmly. And remember that Luffy did ask for help, but Ace ignored him. And Ace knows that as well, that's why he's beating himself up for it, Zoro agreed, and Luffy obviously doesn't blame him either, that's only making him feel worse. Ace seemed to be fighting the tears, but they were falling down his face all the same. I'm worthless. He cried out, now sobbing outright, completely worthless. Ace, Magra said gently as Chopper sniffled a little at Ace's heartbroken tone. I'm so sorry, Luffy, he croaked out. Luffy moved a little in bed, as if he could hear him and tried to answer, but he couldn't seem to wake himself up. So, sorry. So I think that's when he really starts to change, Sanji said softly. He already lost one brother, Robin reminded him quietly, and he almost ended up losing his second. The idea of him losing Luffy was unbearable to him. And not just because he promised Sabo that he would take care of him, but also because then he'd be alone. He just didn't realize how much he meant to him till now, Usopp said quietly, now fully understanding. You never do realize how important someone is to you until you lose them, Brook said softly, thinking of his old crew. Ace-san is lucky that this accident wasn't fatal. Yeah, he probably would never have recovered if Luffy did die from that, Nami said looking down. I don't think that he could have ever forgiven himself for that. You'd never guess it, Usopp said, pacing the room. I mean, he just charges in without thinking about it. I swear that he has a death wish or something. After all, he just wouldn't run no matter who he was up against. Zoro looked away. He didn't say anything to contradict Usopp, but he knew the feeling of refusing to run all too well. He knew that the reason that Ace stayed in that fire to fight Blue Jam was so that he could protect Luffy. He, himself, often stayed his ground to fight against someone as well. He put a hand to his chest as he remembered his first meeting with Mihawk. How his tiny knife had pierced his chest, so close to his heart, how his rival had asked him why he wouldn't step back. Zoro couldn't explain it, even to himself why he didn't move. All he knew was that if he moved to retreat, if he took so much as one step backwards, everything that had made him who he was would have fallen away from him. He couldn't have lived with himself if he let that happen, there really wouldn't have been anything left of him. Was that what Ace felt when he stood his ground to fight? That he would lose Luffy, Sabo, or someone else he cared about if he ran? He glanced down at the crying Ace again, wondering if this was the first time he had ever shed tears for someone. He could see now that Ace wasn't afraid of death, rather his greatest fear was failing. Ace didn't move where he was the entire time. Even as Magra left him alone, saying that he would be back with more medicine later, he sat there by Luffy's side well into the night as the storm went on outside, rattling the windows and door. Once in a while, Luffy would whimper in his sleep and cringe softly. Ace really needs to sleep, Chopper said quietly as suddenly Luffy began to cry softly. Luffy, Ace said at once, and was at his side in an instant. Luffy, what's wrong? Come on, talk to me, Luffy. Is he in that much pain? Usopp asked anxiously. Well, I'm sure it's not exactly a tickle he's feeling, Sanji said grumpily. I think he's having a nightmare, Robin said softly. No, Sabo, Ace. Luffy sobbed in his sleep as Ace was looking around, trying to figure out what he should do. Finally, he decided on gently shaking him awake. He should be careful, Chopper said as he shook Luffy's quivering shoulders, if he's not then he could reopen those wounds. Oh, I doubt that he'd let himself be that careless, Brook said softly. No, Luffy continued to shout, scream and cry, it's hot. 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 Frankie repeated baffled, why would he be feeling hot? He's got a fever, Chopper said at once, noticing the way he's sweating in the red forehead. It's making him delirious. Luffy, Ace now shouted out, shaking him harder than ever. Luffy, wake up, damn it, wake up. Luffy's large eyes suddenly snapped open and he was gasping for breath as he looked up at Ace with tears. Luffy, Ace croaked out as Luffy continued to cry. Hey, Ace said, his hands shaking, what did I do? What's wrong? Fire, Luffy cried out, there was all this fire. What fire? Frankie asked in frustration before he realized what he was talking about. He was dreaming about the terminal fire, Robin summarized for them. Luffy's afraid of fire, Chopper asked in surprise, but he never seemed to be scared of it before. It's only natural, Robin said, if he hadn't had any trauma from that event, then I would be worried. He was trapped in such a wildfire and thought he lost Ace back there, of course that would be traumatic for anyone. Knowing the Luffy today, I'm guessing that he must have gotten over this fear at some point in his life, but right now, it's haunting his dreams. Luffy, Ace gasped, you're safe. There's no fire here. It took a few minutes for Ace to calm Luffy down enough for him to stop crying. As Luffy blinked up at him, listening to the storm continue to go on outside, he noticed something strange about his brother's face. Ace, Luffy asked slowly, pointing at his eyes, why were you crying? Ace looked tense by the question, and moved back a little ways. It's nothing, he said hurriedly, wiping his eyes as he said that, nothing that you need to be worried about. I thought he'd call Luffy stupid and tell him that he wasn't crying, Usopp said. But if he did, then it would be like taking back that apology, Frankie told him. And the little guy couldn't do that. But you never cry, Luffy said, sounding surprised. Why? They all sat there watching the two as the uncomfortable silence seemed to stretch on and on. It went on for so long, that several of them felt the need to scream out, just to make sure that they didn't go deaf. But finally, I was scared, Ace finally answered, hiding his face in his knees so that Luffy couldn't see him. The Straw Hats all stared long and hard at him. This was the first time that they ever heard Ace admit that he was scared of anything, and here he was admitting that he was scared that his stubbornness almost killed his little brother. Scared, Luffy repeated, his eyes wide. Because of that bear. No idiot, Ace muttered, his face still hidden. I thought I was gonna lose you, I was terrified, he confessed. Ace, Nami whispered softly. It was my fault you got hurt, Ace went on. But Luffy was shaking his head. You didn't tell me to fight the Bear King, he said. I wanted to prove that I could fight as well as you. No, but I didn't help when you asked for it, he said angrily. Nami's eyes widened. This was just like how Sanji and Zoro explained it, almost word for word. She gazed at them out of the corners of her eyes. Funny how they would know all about brothers when neither one of them had any, at least not that she knew of. That's okay, Luffy said, forcing a smile, even though it was obvious that he was still hurting. I don't want you to worry. Someday, I'm gonna be even stronger than you are. So that's that. The way he said it was like he planned for it all to happen. Ace's head snapped up and he stared at him before he got angry again. What the hell does that have to do with you almost dying? Luffy only smiled a little wider as his eyes closed and he began to drift off to sleep. I'm not sure I get what just happened, Nami said softly. She grew up with an older sister, but brothers were almost a new species for her. Especially these two brothers. I think he means that he didn't want Ace to worry about him all the time, Robin answered for her, but knowing Luffy, I could be wrong. Ace sat there keeping a close eye on him the whole time, but his eyes were oddly blank as he stared ahead of him and they listened to Luffy's soft breathing. As the darkness came back and the scene slowly started to fade away, they could still make out Ace's face and him saying, almost like a chant to himself, don't worry. I'll keep you safe this time. I promised Sabo that I would, I won't let something like that happen again. This time, I'll protect you. And then it was gone. The Straw Hats continued to stare ahead of them as Usopp began to cry again. Now that has to be the sweetest thing I've ever seen. He covered his eyes with his arm again as Frankie and Chopper joined in and began to bawl with Brook's eye sockets looking watery. Hearing such determination takes my breath away, he cried, not that I can breathe anymore, yo-ho-ho. I don't know how much more of this I can take, Frankie sobbed, pulling out his tissue again. I have a new song coming up, called, A Brother's Love. A tearful story about a big brother determined to protect his little brother. At the rate they're going we'll all drown in their tears, Robin said, looking at the waterfalls coming from their eyes. Zoro smiled softly. This time, he could tell that Ace meant every word. The moment he said, I'll protect you, won't be forgotten. The next memory popped up and they were distressed at first to see that they were standing on air again. I just can't get used to it, Frankie said looking down at the ground that was far beneath them. Think we should go back yet? Asked a familiar voice behind them, and they turned to see that the two brothers were sitting on a thick branch high in a tree. It appeared to have been a few days since the bear attack. Though Luffy was happily swinging around like a monkey, he was still pale. What a relief, Chopper said happily. I'm so glad Luffy's made it through all right. Wow, Luffy said, gazing out at the view. Wow is right, Brook said, his skull face seemed to smile as he gazed out at the sea. There was a brilliantly golden sunset, bright and warm, spreading a pretty golden red color across the ocean. Luffy swung there happily as he watched it with Ace right beside him as always. Suddenly a gust of wind came blowing and blew his trademark straw hat right off his head. Gasping out, he almost fell as he made a wild snatch for it. Thankfully, he tightened his grip on the branch before he slipped and Ace was the one who got the hat. Damn it Luffy, he said in annoyance, don't do that. Sorry, he said, scrambling up to sit and taking the hat back. What's with that hat anyway, Luffy? Ace asked as he watched Luffy shove it back on his head. You never take that thing off. He doesn't know about how Shanks gave it to him. Nami asked in surprise. I guess not, Usopp said blinking at the thought. Maybe it never came up. Shanks gave it to me. Luffy said proudly, grinning happily at his brother. Shanks again? Ace asked him, leaning his back up against the tree trunk as he gazed out at the sea. He's the one who saved you didn't he? Yeah, Luffy informed him. And I promised that I'd bring it back to him someday. It's a really important treasure to him. An old hat, Ace teased lightly. Shanks once said that someone really important to him gave it to him, Luffy said grinning. Said that the man he admired most gave it to him as a present. He said that it was his old captain back when he was starting out as a cabin boy. I find it ironic that it was actually Ace's dad's hat, Frankie said, shaking his head. I still can't believe that Ace was the son of the Pirate King. Of all people, it's almost like fate had a special interest with these two from the start, Zoro thought to himself. So that's why you're so protective of it? Ace asked, reaching over and tilting the hat back so that he could see Luffy's face. Luffy grinned. Ace was probably one of the only few people he let touch his precious treasure. And he's also the idiot who left a devil fruit lying around with you. He went on, his eyebrows raised. Luffy laughed. Yeah, he was so upset at first. But I'm glad I ate it. He stretched his face out happily. Look what I can do. Ace shook his head at Luffy's antics. You really don't mind being made of rubber? He asked him, leaning back again. I mean, it's not going to be easy going through life like that. Take it from me, most people won't take well to those who are different. Shanks said I was special and that others would make fun of me for it, Luffy said, thinking back as he merrily kicked his legs out, but Shanks was absolutely right. Ace yawned as he gazed out at the sea. If nothing else, you're weird, but that's good. But you gotta toughen up too, ya know. After all, I'll be leaving here in 7 years. You'll have to wait a few more before you go out, but I won't be here to protect you. Don't worry about me, Luffy said proudly, holding his arms up. I'm gonna become stronger and stronger. Ace rolled his eyes with an amused smile. Sure, yeah I will, Luffy said determinedly. You're always looking out for me. And I want you to know it's okay for you to have fun sometimes too, and I'd never think less of you no matter what you did. Like with the Bear King. I knew you'd get me out of there if something happened. Ace's eyes widened as he stared at Luffy as if he had never seen him before in his life. Zoro glanced down at Luffy. Luffy wasn't smart, but every once in a while he gets to the heart of the matter. He had just told Ace that he didn't blame him at all for him getting hurt because he knew that he'd be there for him when it counted. And that no matter what he wanted him to be happy and he'd always admire him as his big brother even when he was seen at his weakest. Ace looked away, his face red, but a thoughtful smile was playing around his mouth. But when he spoke, he sounded as cool and as calm as always. Right, that'll happen when I need you to rescue me. That's so sweet, this is killing me here. Frankie sniffled so that the darkness faded again. He doesn't want his brother to be worried about him, Robin smiled. Unfortunately, that's a requirement to hanging out with Luffy, Usopp sighed. When the memory resumed, they saw Ace standing in front of the bandit's house with Makino while Luffy was playing with some more beetles behind the forts. Oh, Makino. Sanji swooned as he almost drooled at the sight of her. My dear, it's been too long since I've seen your beautiful face. Would you stop that? Nami demanded, rolling her eyes. Nami Swan, you're so beautiful even when you're chewing me out, Sanji swooned at her instead. Hey, some of the bandits were calling from inside the house, thankfully breaking Sanji's romantic mood off. Makino brought us some sake. Like they need any more reason to drink. Nami sighed, but Makino had her eyes on Ace. So, she said, crouching down to talk to him face to face, what was it that you wanted to ask me? Ace smiled at her and said resolutely, I want you to teach me how to greet people properly. Greet people? Usopp repeated in surprise. What brought this on all of a sudden? Frankie asked. Well, his manners are much to be desired, Sanji whispered to himself. How to greet people properly? Makino repeated in great surprise. Yeah, Ace nodded with a smile on his face. What brought about this change in attitude? Makino asked him curiously, and they were all burning with the same question. Ace proudly folded his arms in his usual smug manner, as if everything was his idea. I'm Luffy's brother, after all. Someday, I would like to meet the red-haired captain and thank him for everything he did for my little brother. Oh, so that's it, Robin smiled. Boy, he's really come a long way since the bitter, angry kid we first saw, Sanji said. And he wasn't the only one who thought that. Makino was looking surprised but was now smiling widely at him, as if she could see that he was becoming a different person. Why are you looking at me like that? He demanded, his cheeks a bright red color, when he noticed the look. Makino only laughed at the look on his face as she said, I'm sorry. I'll teach you. I think he likes her, yo ho ho, Brook laughed. How can anyone not like her? Sanji demanded, whispered softly, oh, my love, how I wish you can know my feelings. It's funny, Chopper said, it's like Ace doesn't even realize that he's changed so much. Oh, I doubt that he has realized it, Robin laughed, her hand on the doctor's shoulder. That is often the case. The best kind of changes always happen gradually, and usually turn out better than if we try to force it. Look at him, he doesn't even realize how different he's acting. Is that really how it works? Chopper asked in surprise. Yes, she answered cheerfully, after all, I'm living proof of that. Ace grinned back at her, glad that she wasn't laughing anymore, just as Luffy came running over to see what they were talking about. What are you guys doing? He asked, smiling brightly at them both. Makino beamed back and answered, Ace-san here wants lessons on how to greet someone. Manner lessons, Sanji said fondly, I'm guessing that Luffy didn't sit through them. Lessons on greeting someone, Luffy repeated confused. Makino chuckled. Let's start our first lesson now about how to express gratitude, she offered, sitting back. Okay, Ace said eagerly as Luffy sat down to watch. So I guess we have Makino to thank for the ace we met in Alabasta, Usopp said cheerfully, wondering how these lessons were going to go. Now it all makes sense. I think she and Luffy are good influences on him, Frankie laughed. Boy, they do have that effect on people, don't they? Alright, she said, clapping her hands together. Let's get today's lesson started. This I can't wait to see, Sanji said, watching them eagerly. I hope Makino's patient, this might take a while. Ace bowed his head low and said, pleased to be working with ya. That was great, Ace, Luffy said next to him as Ace grinned. No, it wasn't, that was rude, Nami said, shaking her head. Wrong, Makino said, unknowingly agreeing with her. In times like this you should say, I'm pleased to be working with you. What? He got it wrong, Luffy asked in surprise. The way he said it sounded cool though. Please, Makino-san, teach Luffy too. Sanji begged. She merely smiled and answered, someday, Ace-kun wants to meet the red-haired captain you're indebted to. We started these lessons because he wants to learn how to greet him properly. You mean Shanks? Luffy asked in surprise. Yeah, Ace said, his hands at his sides and a grin still there. By the time I meet Shanks, I'll be a pirate myself. As a pirate, and as your brother, it's an obvious duty to show him respect. That is true, Brook agreed, thinking it over, I too look forward to the day I meet him so that I could thank him as well. Now, Makino said, bringing them back to the lesson. Try to imagine that he's right here in front of you. Ace frowned a little, clearly imagining hard as he said forcefully, I'm Ace. Who the hell are you? Wrong, Nami said as Brook laughed. Makino crossed her fingers and made a buzzing sound, signaling that was wrong. That's no good, she said good-naturedly, who the hell, is too rude. She has perfect manners. That is why we're made for each other, Sanji sighed happily, staring at her. Luffy stood up. Who are you? Right, Ace tried again, who might you be? Again Makino crossed her fingers and made the buzzing sound. Better, but still, Sanji sighed, shaking his head. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Ace, and you are. Who are you, you bastard? Right, Luffy offered helpfully. Luffy's really not helping, Usopp laughed. Who are you supposed to be? Ace tried again with the buzz. Who is this? He tried. Again he got it wrong. Who is that? Right, Luffy asked, running out of ways to greet someone rudely. This is ridiculous, Nami sighed, but she couldn't help but laugh. And this time Makino laughed as well. All wrong, she said. Are you even trying? Oh, I'm sure he is, Robin said contentedly, it's just that he's used to living with bandits, hunting for food, and stealing. No one's ever told him otherwise. He's learning everything for the first time. Ace turned to Luffy and snapped at him, trying to vent some of his frustration, this is all because you're talking nonsense. Go away. Well, he's not helping, Usopp grinned as Chopper giggled to himself, but you're the one who's getting it wrong, Ace. If only I was there, Sanji said, I'd have gotten them learning manners quicker than blinking. After all, I'm the soul of a refined man. A damned soul perhaps, Zoro stated. What was that moss head? Sanji demanded, turning around and marching over to him. A damned soul, he repeated slowly and clearly. I hope you die a painful death someday. Sanji yelled. Now was that something a refined soul would have said? He asked grinning. I am refined when it comes to the ladies, he said tenaciously. Oh right, Luffy cried out, interrupting their fight. The look on his face was of pleasant surprise, as if remembering something and stated excitedly, hey, Ace, yesterday, I found this nest of a giant snake, filled with huge eggs. Let's go and get them now. Huh? Ace asked excitedly, suddenly looking hungry. Huge eggs. For a moment, he looked as if he was going to run off and get them, but he suddenly shook his head. No, I can't, he said frowning. Luffy looked confused and Ace explained, I'm studying on how to greet people. But I'll be in trouble if the huge snake catches me there by myself, Luffy whined, tugging on Ace's arm to follow him. But I'll be fine if you're with me, so come on. Never stop him from doing something stupid before, Nami muttered, but she was still oddly touched by what Luffy said. But I guess this shows just how much he trusted Ace, Robin said, understanding what Nami was feeling. I think it's clear that Luffy truly feels safe with him. Robin's heart suddenly went out to her captain. She could only imagine just what it must have been like for him 2 years ago, that feeling of safety being destroyed. She, too, often wondered what it would feel like to feel safe again. It faded out. The memories after that were mostly quick scenes. They saw Luffy and Ace running wild through the middle forest, training with one another in the clearing, and in one they watched as the duo were even able to defeat the bear that had nearly killed Luffy, and to add insult to injury, they made him into a stew. But as the Straw Hats watched, they noticed that the boys were working hard on staying away from the Great Terminal in Goa. But through the flickering memories, they soon saw that they had been right. It had only been a few months since the fire and the Great Terminal was soon back to normal, as if the fire had never happened, and new residences were now living there just as it had been before. Seeing it made them all furious again. It was like spitting in the faces of all the people who had died here. You know, Zoro said suddenly, his eye narrowed in disgust. Once we're done sailing the Grand Line, I say we come back and give the bastard nobles here something to really be scared of. I love that idea, Nami agreed bitterly, something to look forward to after we make it through the new world. This will all be a piece of cake. The latest memory was one where Ace came running in to save Luffy after the latter got himself stuck in the mouth of a giant centipede. After using the staff to stab the beast's belly, it dropped Luffy, who pulled himself free of the pincers. Hold still, Ace commanded as the giant bug lay dead on the ground and he was now treating a nasty gash on Luffy's arm. OWW. It hurts. Ace. Luffy cried as Ace spread a thick paste-like substance on his arm. It stings. Please stop. He needs to get it wrapped up. Chopper said firmly, if he's not careful, it could get infected. I'm gonna make sure it hurts if you keep complaining, Luffy. Ace snapped. But it hurts. Luffy whined, rubbing his eyes. This coming from the same kid who gets his face turned to mush every time they fight. Nami asked with sweat drop. I don't get it. Ace sighed. Big baby, don't you wanna get better? He muttered, though here he sounded more fond than annoyed, as Luffy sniffed loudly. I often wonder that, Frankie muttered to himself. There. All done, he said, finishing wrapping up the arm. Don't make that face, he said, almost stern, but his mouth was twitching as well. As soon as Luffy stopped crying and looked at his arm, he broke into a big smile, his tears and all memory of pain now gone. Ace was so cool. You beat that giant bug. You're awesome, Luffy cried out excitedly. Well, I see that he's feeling better, Nami sighed. Really, what was with this guy? One minute he's crying and in pain, the next he's happy like it never even happened. She just didn't get him. Ace blushed a little as he muttered, you idiot. But he was grinning the whole time as Luffy went running off to stare at the giant centipede. Wow, he said in awe. I've never seen one this big. He picked up a stick and was poking at it curiously, with Ace yelling at him to stop it. You know, once Granddad left me in the jungle and I ate things like this all the time. He said eagerly, only they were a lot smaller. I remember that. Usopp winced, thinking of the first memory they saw when they arrived here and how Garp came marching through the jungle to find him. He felt sick to his stomach at the thought of having to resort to eating bugs to stave off starvation. These things are poisonous. Ace sighed, we can't eat it. Look, we'll go hunting for a boar or gator later for dinner. Don't be such a baby. Oh yeah, who's the baby now, scared of a big bug? Luffy teased. Aw, brothers, Brook said affectionately, they warm my soul, yo-ho-ho-ho. Who are you calling a baby? Ace demanded. Ace is a baby, Ace is a, whoa. Luffy sang out as Ace tried to tackle him and they began a chase around the clearing. They're so cute, Robin smiled, I just wanna hug one of them. Damn, Sanji hissed softly, falling to the ground in depression, again, what do kids have that I don't? I'm cute. I wish I had brothers, Chopper sighed, watching them run and laugh together. As they laughed at the two, Ace sat down and watched as Luffy suddenly spotted a few large beetles underneath a tree. Ace suddenly said, listen up Luffy, there's something we need to talk about. Look Ace, it's an atlas, Luffy said, ignoring his brother's statement and holding the bug up. Would you pay attention for longer than 3 seconds? Ace demanded, giving him a bonk on the head, while fighting a smile. That's what I wish, Nami nodded. Luffy's short attention span was the bane of her existence. Ace sighed. Listen Luffy, I've been doing some thinking, he started once again, finally getting the boy's attention. And I think I've been setting a bad example for you with the way we're always stealing food. So he finally gets it, Nami said pleasantly surprised, but pleased. What about it? Luffy asked, frowning at him as he rubbed his sore head. You said that we need to eat and those nobles always waste anything that they don't think is good. Just another reason to hate them, Sanji growled, how dare these rats waste food like that? Well, it's rude, Ace said thinking it over, at least that's what Makino says. It's rude and illegal, Brook laughed. Luffy blinked at him and lowered his head, but we don't have any money, and the food in Hightown is expensive. We usually just hunt for dinner. True, Ace said proudly, and it's good for us, we can survive on our own. I mean, even you can catch a croc by yourself now. But we're not going to just steal the food anymore. Really? Nami said impressed, Ace really has changed. I don't get it Ace, if we're not gonna steal the food and we don't have any money then what will we do? Luffy asked as he followed Ace. You'll see, he grinned before he whispered softly into his ear and Luffy's eyes widened. Like what Makino says? He asked him. Yeah, Ace said grinning. Just follow my lead. What are they going to do? Usopp asked, not sure he liked that evil grin. But Luffy seemed to be on board with whatever Ace said and he jumped up as the two of them went running off in the direction of Goa. The Straw Hats didn't say much as they followed them, all of them silently wondering just what they were about to see. They followed them through the mounds of junk in the terminal, before they went running through the gate that led to the back streets in Edge Town. Sneaking into High Town was no problem for these two. The Straw Hats glared around at the nobles, each one all going about their lives as if they had nothing to be guilty about. It's been a while, Luffy said, looking around at the clean streets. Yeah, it's hard to believe that it's already been almost a year since the fire, Ace agreed, but it's good that we stay away from this place for even that long. A year, Chopper whispered in amazement. Time flies, Brook sighed. It's already been a year for them, but we just finished watching such a horrific scene and are still coming to terms with it. As they walked through the town, the nobles gave the boys disgusted looks, some of them covering their mouths and noses as they moved away, as if they smelled like the same garbage they threw away. I didn't need a reminder to what I hated about these guys, Frankie spat as he glared at the nobles, daring them to come closer. Once, as they were passing, an old man walking some frou-frou dog dressed in ridiculous clothes, stopped to stare intently at Luffy, as if trying to remember where he'd seen him before. Ace managed to suppress a growl that threatened to escape through his throat as he glared at the man threateningly. "What are you looking at?" he demanded, sounding more like a protective brother. "Oh, nothing," the man said, jumping back, away from Ace. "It's just that I feel like I've seen this boy before, and you too now that I think of it." "You think he would recognize the kids who once terrorized this place?" Usopp said as Ace grabbed Luffy's arm and pulled him along, looking politely confused, away from the man. "They have their heads so far up their asses that they don't notice anything," Sanji said. The scene faded after that, but almost immediately, it appeared again, standing exactly where they had been standing before. For a second, they thought that they were still in the same memory, at least until they heard someone shouting. They just ate and ran. Someone stopped them. Ace and Luffy had come running towards them from up the road, the chief chasing after them, screaming at them to stop running and pay for their meal. "Wait, I thought that Ace said that they weren't going to steal food anymore," Nami said, thinking it over. But as they got closer, Ace blinked, as if remembering the same thing. "Oh, right, we're being rude here, you think?" Usopp asked, smacking his own forehead at that. "Right," Luffy said, and they stopped running to look at the man. He looked briefly surprised, apparently wondering if they were going to pay up. But instead, they just bowed and called out, "Thanks for the meal." The Straw Hats couldn't help but laugh here. "Shut up, you damn kids," the chief yelled. "Just pay the bill." "I love that," Usopp laughed. "Now I get where Luffy does his eat and run stunts all the time." "Ace is still a bad influence," Nami sighed, but then again she was hardly one to talk about stealing things that didn't belong to her. "Oh, they deserve it anyway," Zoro smirked as the memories shifted again. But the next one they heard it before they saw anything. "Morons," thundered a familiar voice. There was Garp, fuming as he yelled at both of his grandsons, who stood there in front of him, all of them back in the forest. "After these last few months of working tirelessly for the Marines, I finally get a chance to visit my grandsons, and what do I find? You brats were causing trouble." Garp hollered at them. "I hope the food was worth it," Zoro said, as the boys faced him, looking terrified but unremorseful. "I'm not going to let my grandsons to be some such low thieves." Garp yelled, "You're going to be honest, Marines." "Is he still going on about that?" Sanji asked, exasperated. "You think he'd have given up by now?" "I'm guessing that stubbornness is in the family," Nami sighed, glancing at Luffy. "What was that?" Ace demanded. "Oh, I do plan on leaving this wretched kingdom behind when I go out to sea, all right, but not as a Marine." "Brave man," Zoro said, shaking his head. "You imbecile," Garp yelled, punching Ace hard enough to knock him down. "Ace," Luffy called, going to his brother's side at once. "What are you doing, Gramps?" Ace demanded hotly. "I thought that was obvious," Usopp gulped down. "I've been saying it from the start. He's trying to kill you too." "What do you mean, going out to sea?" Garp bellowed out. "I'll never let you." "Again, I feel for him," Sanji said, sweating at the thought. All that hard work only for his grandsons to become world-famous criminals. "But what can you do?" Ace looked away, rubbing the bruise on his cheek. "You're not my father. So quite acting all high and mighty. Why should I listen to you, old man? Call me Granddad." Garp snapped. "Like you deserve it." Nami asked, sweat dropped. "Old man," Ace retorted. "He's really asking for it now," Zoro muttered. Really, were they trying to get on Garp's bad side? Garp held up his fist. "You want another taste of my fist of love?" he threatened. "If that's love, I ever wanna find it," Usopp whispered with Chopper nodding fearfully next to him. "He's scaring me," Chopper whined. "Granddad," Luffy said, standing up and glaring at him, "I'm gonna get much stronger and then set out to sea with Ace." "Does he want to die?" Brook cried out. Garp then punched Luffy hard in the head so that his forehead swelled up and he was crying again. At once Ace stood up and stood protectively in front of Luffy, standing between him and Garp. "You idiot," Garp yelled at Luffy, "you too. Don't hit Luffy, you damn old geezer." Ace yelled at him. "Ace, how dare you?" Garp yelled furiously. Nami sighed as the darkness came back and blocked the vision from them. "Just watching the three of them makes me feel like I'm losing my mind. I don't know how much more of them I can take. Those three just seem to bring the worst in each other," Robin said, smiling until they were suddenly standing near a small campfire with Luffy, Ace, and Garp piling food into their mouths. "Listen up," Garp called to them both, swallowing a mouthful of food. "You never know when you'll be called into battle. So when you eat, you have to eat as much as you can. This is another important part of being a Marine. Remember it well, you too." "So he was the one who taught Luffy that?" Sanji demanded hotly, feeling the urge to hit Garp. I should have known. Does he realize how difficult he made my life because of that? Ace, who finished pulling out a fish skeleton from his mouth, demanded, "What do you mean, Marine? That's not for you to decide." "He's got a point," Brooke said, nodding along with Ace. "Trying to control a child's life never works out." He fell silent for a moment before he thought to himself, look at what happened to Sabo because his parents tried to control his life. "What?" Garp yelled. "I'm gonna be a pirate." Ace challenged him, no longer paying attention as Luffy started stuffing his face with more and more food. "No," Garp yelled back, "you're gonna be a Marine." And so they began arguing back and forth between Marines and pirates. "They might want to start paying attention," Robin said happily as Luffy inhaled the food. "How does he do that?" Chopper asked in amazement as Luffy leaned back happily, having finished putting away all the food that was there into his mouth and swallowing it whole. "He has a bottomless stomach, there's no other explanation," Sanji whispered. "He's not normal, even by these standards." "Delicious," Luffy called, patting his belly as the other two finally looked down and their jaws dropped in horror and the Straw Hats all burst out laughing at the looks on their faces. "That's why you can never let your guard down when you're having a meal with him," Sanji sighed, having put up giant mousetraps in the past to keep Luffy from the fridge. "Hopefully, they learn this." "That was good," Luffy said happily, falling back and going to sleep. As the other two sat down on either side of him, Luffy whispered in his sleep, "I wanna be a pirate." "Oh, this is just rich," Frankie roared with laughter as Ace and Garp looked at him. Suddenly, Ace smirked, if Luffy did become a Marine, he'd eat all the provisions in one day. "And that's how long it would take him to eat everything on our ship too if I didn't guard it," Sanji hissed. Garp looked at him and burst out laughing. "He might be more dangerous than the enemy pirates." "You have no idea," Zoro laughed as the darkness faded. The memories were coming much more quickly now. This time when they came back, it was still dark. They were now inside the small room where the brothers used to stay in at Dayton's before they left. Luffy was dozing underneath one of the blankets apparently waiting for Ace as he drew a bunch of squiggles on a piece of paper. Luffy looked to be much older than he had been in the previous memories, perhaps 10 or even 11 now, but he still had that sweet, innocent expression on his face as he drew. "What's happening now?" Usopp asked, looking over to see one of the atrocious drawings that only Luffy could do. For about 5 minutes, nothing else seemed to happen, and Zoro, growing bored, went out to try and find something more interesting to watch. "Zoro," Nami called after him as he headed to the door. "Quiet," he called back in annoyance, "I think I hear them all talking here." He walked through the wall to see that Garp was there, sharing a heavy drink with Dayton. "You think that a grandfather would at least try to visit his grandsons more than just a few times a year," Dayton spoke to him gruffly. "I do try. But I'm surprised here. I don't hear you complaining about them as usual," Garp told her as he drank more sake, making Zoro's mouth water. "I don't mind it so much anymore," Dayton confessed. "That Ace certainly has changed since you brought that second monster here. If you had told me back then that he would be like this now, I'd have said that you were drinking too much. I didn't see any hope for him." "That is good to hear," Garp confessed. "To be honest, even I was starting to grow worried about him." "What's going on, Zoro?" Usopp asked, as the other Straw Hats came to his side. He didn't answer as he watched the two sit there. Suddenly, Garp reached into his front shirt and pulled out a wrinkled sheet of paper. "The reason I came here tonight was so that I could show you this. I think you might find this interesting." "What's this?" she asked in annoyance, taking the sheet from him and looking over it before staring at it with wide eyes. "So this is just the latest wanted poster issue from the world government," Garp said softly. "He may not be a pirate, but he's just jumped up to the top of their most wanted list. In fact, did you hear what they're calling him? The most wanted man in the world." "You mean?" Chopper said softly, suddenly realizing who the man in the picture had to be. "Luffy's father," Robin said, thinking of Dragon. "So," Dayton said, giving the paper back to Garp. "Dragon's officially on the top of the government's hit list." "Huh, right now he is the list," Garp sighed with a bitter laugh. "But I say good luck trying to track him down. Already, they consider him the biggest demon to have ever lived since Roger. The world government thought that the era of pirates would end with Roger's death, but in the end it backfired on them. Now Dragon's causing trouble in the world. The world nobles have already demanded that we use all our resources to hunt him down." "Huh, as if it would be that easy. It's almost impossible to find that man if he doesn't want to be found." He leaned back against the wall and said, "If they can figure out how to catch the wind, then maybe they have a chance." Well said, Robin thought to herself. Yes, Dragon was very much like the wind itself, here 1 minute, and gone the next. "I still can't believe that's your kid they want dead," Dayton snapped. "On second thought, I can believe it. I guess we know whose side that Dragon takes after." She stared at her bottle of sake before she said, "And I guess that makes him Luffy's father." Garp nodded. "He may not act like it, but I already see a lot of Dragon in him." "So now it's like with Ace?" Dayton asked. "If the government finds out about Luffy's birth, they would never let them live," Robin answered knowingly. "Could they really want them both dead just because of their fathers?" Chopper asked her. Of course they would, Robin answered grimly. As far as they're concerned, those two were born evil, just because of their fathers. To the government, they were never supposed to exist. The fact that they're alive is considered nothing but a sin to them. That's a load of crap, Frankie said, glancing at her. You once believed that you didn't deserve to live, that your own existence was a sin, don't you remember what I said to you? Robin gave him a sad smile, remembering the ride to Annie's lobby. That being alive, just existing, can't be a sin. Truer words never spoken, Usopp said, all of them looking at Robin with fierce determination. Frankie was right. It wasn't the government's place to decide if someone should be allowed to live or not. If they were never supposed to exist, then why were they ever born at all? The Marines were just using this as an excuse for their murderous habits. They'll hunt him down, Garp sighed, throwing the empty bottle over his head and reaching for another one. Believe me, it wasn't easy keeping this secret at HQ. It's the main reason why I want them both to become Marines. If word ever got out, it wouldn't matter though, will it? Dayton asked him. We both know that all the government needs is proof and they'll kill them both. You don't honestly think that they'll let this go simply because they joined the Marines, do you? Garp was silent for a moment. No, he confessed. But I don't see any other way out of this. Right now, as far as the world is concerned, the two of them are just a couple delinquent orphans. Which they are now that you think of it. But no one could ever imagine otherwise, and I intend to keep it that way. Dayton sighed. Boy, of all the children that you had to bring here, the sons of the two most infamous criminals that the world's ever known. Just why did you bring them to me? We've known each other a long time, he grinned at her. And I know how soft you are on kids. Shut up, she barked at him. Now, I think I see what he's getting at, Brooke laughed. She really does seem fond of children. It's in a woman's nature, I guess, Sanji sighed, wondering just what made women care about kids so much. I can't begin to guess what's going on in his head, however, Brooke said, looking at Garp. This must be so hard on him. He was doing all this to keep them safe, but in the end, it wasn't enough. But I agree wholeheartedly with what Dayton said, Robin answered him. There's no way that they would ever be left alone even if they joined the Marines. Hey, Chopper said softly, just realizing something, how are we seeing this when Luffy's not even here? They all glanced at each other, slightly surprised by the question. Just because Luffy doesn't remember doesn't mean that it didn't happen, Zoro offered, though not even he knew what he was saying. Luffy was right in the other room, but just because he didn't hear what they were saying didn't mean that this conversation never happened. Perhaps Luffy could vaguely hear their voices but not make out anything. He didn't know. All he did know was that the truth of Dragon seemed to be a big shock to him when he did find out about it at Water 7. You gonna tell Luffy? Dayton asked suddenly. About his father. Right, Garp said, rolling his eyes, and how do I tell a kid this? Not even Ace was supposed to know about his father and I still don't know how he found out about it. Plus, it doesn't help that Luffy has a big mouth. No, it's easier if we keep this quiet from everyone else. That makes a lot of sense, Nami sighed. Yes, she couldn't blame Garp a bit for keeping this quiet. Dayton finished her drink as she cleaned her mouth. You leaving for the Marines tomorrow again? She demanded. That Ace is already almost 13 now, you know. Time flies, Frankie whistled out, repeating what Brooke said before. Garp laughed. Right, but I'm afraid that Navy HQ can't do anything on their own. I have to stay with them little longer, though I often wonder if it's worth it. He raised his eyebrows at her and asked, you won't tell anyone about this, will you? About Dragon, she asked irritably. Why should I care about who their fathers are? It's no business of mine. You know, I think my respect for her just went up a notch just for saying that, Frankie smiled. But soon afterwards, the two adults passed out where they laid, their faces red from all the drinking. Nami sighed. Honestly, I don't understand them. But as they were about to head to the back room, they heard another door open and Ace stepped in. He was certainly much older, though still young. He was quickly leaving his preteen body behind and looked more mature than they had last saw him. There was a towel over his shoulders and he already had his signature orange hat on his head. Judging from the wet hair and towel, they guessed that he had just taken a bath, but his eyes were emotionless as he slowly stepped into the room, staring at them both on the floor, looking completely lost in thought. Sanji's one revealed eye suddenly widened and he said, wait, you don't think he heard what they were saying about Dragon, do you? Most likely, Zoro commented as he watched Ace slowly walk to the back room where Luffy was. If he was outside that door, I don't see how he couldn't. Quickly following Ace, they walked to the back room where Luffy was already half asleep. Ace sat down next to him, just watching him with an unreadable expression on his face. Is he going to be okay? Chopper asked, staring at Ace's empty expression. It's just a shock for him, Robin said softly. All this time, neither one of them had any idea, but he just realized that he and Luffy are in the same situation. The only difference is that Luffy has no idea. Luffy was almost completely out of it now, the memory darkened a little more. But Ace stared down at him and said softly, it's taken you a long time to be able to look at fire without having nightmares, hasn't it? Huh, Luffy croaked out, looking up at him sleepily. Why bring that up? Just thinking, Ace answered. But you still have nightmares sometimes, I notice. He had nightmares about the fire. Nami said softly. Even after all this time. I can't say I'm surprised, Robin sighed, knowing that trauma often took years to heal. She had only just begun to recover from the horror of the Buster Call after all. Something like that would be hard to get over. Luffy turned on his side, his back to Ace, as if ashamed. Only once in a while, he confessed. But they're not as bad as they used to be. I mean, it's just big fires that I don't like. But I'm okay with it, really. Ace smirked a little as Luffy yawned and shut his eyes, fading out. You haven't changed, he said smiling as the memory began to fade. Ace laid down and gently wrapped a protective arm around Luffy's neck, hugging him close. A small, contented smile appeared on Luffy's mouth as everything went dark, as if he felt safe with Ace there shielding him from any nightmares. Man, that really is something special, Brook said softly. I only wish I had a chance to meet Ace-san in person. I think he's really starting to see how much he and Luffy are alike, Nami said smiling, jealous at how two people could be so close. Wait, Usopp said suddenly, you mean that Ace knew all along who Luffy's father was? It would appear so, Robin answered. If he was listening in at the door. But then why didn't he ever tell him? Usopp asked confused. You think he would if they were that close and everything? You think he'd do something like that? Sanji demanded harshly. He knew better than anyone to be considered the child of a demon. For years he'd been tormented with the belief that he was never supposed to be born. That the world would have been happier if he wasn't around. You think he'd push something like that on his little brother? He just had another reason to protect him, Zoro said, sighing as he tilted his head back, gazing up at the endless sea of darkness. It doesn't matter who Luffy's father is. No one said anything to that for a long time as they continued to watch memories flying by. The boys both grew older and continued to grow stronger while living in the forest. They'd go into the trees to hunt and train for days on end before they came back for some rest before running off again. The seasons came and went and things continued to change around them. But nothing changed more than Ace. The angry child was no more and a patient and more polite young man was emerging. Luffy remained the same personality-wise, but the stronger he got, the less he cried. He was growing confident in his abilities, and even Ace had stopped mocking his powers once he finally learned to throw a decent punch. Though he was still known to tease him for it to make him angry. But that soon changed one time when they were watching the two running from guards in Goa after they pulled another dine and dash. Ace looked to be about 15 here and Luffy couldn't have been more than 12. You know, one of these days they're going to get into some really serious trouble because of this. Nami called, running with them, now tired of all the constant running they'd done since coming here. The words were no sooner said when one of the guards held up their rifle and pointed it at the boys' retreating backs. Hold on, isn't that a bit extreme? Usopp yelled out as Chopper screamed. They're only kids here. I guess there's only so much you can take from someone before they snap, Sanji hollered. Why should they worry? Zoro asked. Luffy's immune to bullets. Suddenly, the gun fired and the bullet nailed Luffy right in the back. Ace, next to him, stopped dead and stared in horror as Luffy's eyes widened in stunned surprise before he fell. Luffy! Ace screamed as Luffy's body slowly fell forward, but then he stopped himself as the skin stretched out and the bullet bounced back towards the guards. What the hell just happened? One of the guards screamed out, dropping the gun as he watched the bullet go flying off. You think that they've never seen a bullet bounce off a rubber person before, Frankie commented. I think they just discovered that, Robin said, watching at how Ace caught Luffy, panic now setting into his eyes as he looked around desperately, much like how he did when Luffy had been attacked by that bear. The guards behind them were also freaking out, having no idea to what happened, and Ace used their confusion to make a quick escape. He dragged Luffy off with him, quickly getting out of High Town, and ducked down an alleyway back into Edge Town so that he could examine Luffy. Luffy! Ace gasped, setting Luffy down on the ground. Are you hurt? Luffy seemed to come out of his stunned shock and sat up so suddenly that Ace's jaw fell open. Luffy gave his body a pat down. No, he said, eyes wide. I'm okay. Liar. Ace yelled at him, forcing him to turn around so that he could see. I saw you get shot. But as Ace pulled the shirt up so that they could see his back, there wasn't anything there. Perhaps a slight bruise in the shape of a perfect circle, but nothing else. Ace's eyes suddenly widened. I get it. It makes sense. If blunt attacks don't work on you, then it makes sense that a bullet can't do anything. Finally, he gets it, Zoro said. Well, they never been shot at before so they never had a chance to find out till now, Brook pointed out. Lucky thing too, otherwise, Luffy be dead, Robin offered. Why must you love that morbid imagination of yours, Robin? Usopp moaned out. So I'm bulletproof? Luffy asked, his eyes shining at the thought. That's so cool. Ace just sighed as he bonked him on the head. Don't do that again. On they watched as the boys continued to change and grow up in the future memories. They both became tall and lanky, completed with messy black hair and white eyes, both were big eaters and strong fighters. It was near impossible for anyone not to recognize them as brothers. It warmed the Straw Hats' hearts to see these scenes, yet at the same time it felt like a knife wound with each memory. It only made Ace's death seem that much more tragic. But finally, the day had come. The day before Ace's 17th birthday. Happy birthday, Ace. Luffy cheered, jumping on his back, after they caught another large gator for their dinner. That's not until tomorrow, Runt. He grinned back, grabbing Luffy in a headlock and giving him a noogie. So this is gonna be the last night they spend together. Brook asked them all. So you really leaving tomorrow? Luffy asked excitedly, asking the same question. Yep, Ace grinned back. Then I'll enjoy this last birthday with you, Luffy said contentedly. He's taking his big brother leaving very well, Sanji said in mild surprise. Oh, he's glad that Ace is finally ready to leave, Robin smiled sadly, but I can tell that he's already starting to miss him. But he hasn't even left yet, Chopper pointed out. Just the idea that soon his brother will be going out into the world without him is making him sad, she explained. Since they became brothers they've always been together and now, for the first time since then, they'll be separated. Ace will be going off into the world on his own. Luffy still has to wait another 3 years before he's 17. The two were sitting inside a fort in front of Dayton's house, only this time, the two old huts had been put together to make one. They were sitting up enjoying their dinner as they gazed up at the sky, Ace pointing out the names of several stars as Luffy watched in amazement. It was funny how the littlest thing seemed to make Luffy smile like a child for hours. The night was asleep, snoring lightly as her darkened skies allowed veiled clouds to pass by, occasionally blocking the moon and its stars. Yet, as if in retaliation, they seemed to gleam more brightly, as if despite the clouds. Ace, Luffy suddenly said as he finished another leg of meat. Ace asked looking at him. No, it's nothing, Luffy said smiling. Forget it. Okay, now I know that something's wrong, Usopp said, he's never been like that before. He's hiding something, Frankie said at once. Ace obviously sensed this as well as he looked at him with a mixture of concern and disbelief. I think that's the first time I'd ever heard that before, he said with a small smile tweaking his features. What's bothering you? Nothing, Luffy said at once, it's not important. Ace raised his eyebrows. My little brother keeping secrets from me already. He murmured, half to Luffy, half to himself. Come on, I know you better than that. Tell me what's wrong. He lightly prodded Luffy on the back. Or do I have to wrestle the answer out of you? No, Luffy yelled happily, an evil grin appearing. That's it. This means war. Ace cried out and suddenly they were fighting again, probably for the last time. Luffy leapt out of the way and immediately retaliated, grinning wildly, not willing to forfeit this fight. Several thumps and crashes banged throughout the tiny house, shaking it thoroughly like a leaf. Laughter rang out, loud and clear. Don't they do anything but fight? Usopp asked exasperated. That's what brothers do best, Zoro answered. Finally, the sounds of fighting stopped. They lay there, stretched out on the ground, breathless and slightly bruised from their momentary fistfight. Damn, that was a good punch, Ace chuckled, rubbing his cheek. Not a knockout but hey, you've gotten better. Luffy grinned as he laughed to himself. It's almost like they're still little kids, Nami said watching them laugh with each other. It's been a long time since I've seen Luffy like this. Hey, Luffy, Ace suddenly said, sitting up. Yeah, Luffy asked, mimicking his every movement. Ace paused, as if trying to find the right words to say. Take care of yourself for me, alright. While I'm gone. The Straw Hats looked at Ace, he wasn't looking at his brother as he stared ahead of him at the sky, lost in thought. It was strange to see the usually confident, smug look was now clouded with, was it hesitation? Robin smiled. She could tell that this separation was hard on Luffy, it could only be even harder for Ace. For years, his one purpose was to protect his little brother, but now he would be going on to find a new life for himself. He would be leaving his brother here, though Luffy was now strong enough that he could handle the monsters in the forest and the thugs in town by himself. Ace was still worried. She knew that the idea of finally leaving this island behind and becoming a pirate and heading out on adventures was irresistible to him, but the idea of leaving his brother alone was a difficult thing for him to do. But she also knew that this had to happen. Ace was finally ready to step out into the world and Luffy needed to wait a little longer before he would be ready. It's not like we won't see each other again, Luffy said gleefully, and when we do, I'll be a pirate too. Ace laughed. Yeah, you will. But still, I can't help but worry. So promise me that you'll take care of yourself for me. I'm not worried about leaving you here alone. You can pretty much take care of yourself here. But when you do set out, it'll be like starting over from scratch. Don't worry, Luffy said eagerly, giggling to himself. I'll be a lot stronger in 3 more years. And once I leave here, I'll find a pirate crew. I want, maybe 10 guys. Yeah, 10'll be good. Then we'll set sail for the Grand Line. 10, Nami repeated, where'd he come up with that number? Yeah, when we finally set off for the Grand Line from the East Blue, there were only 5 of us, Sanji said, thinking back. Only 5 in a crew heading to the Grand Line. Brooke said in surprise. My, that's practically unheard of. You want 10 crewmates? Ace asked smiling. You sure that's all you need? After all, a crew is gonna need more than just a captain. Like what? Luffy asked, as if he never thought of that. Like a doctor, navigator, a few swordsmen is always a good idea, Ace listed off. You got that right, Zoro said as Brook laughed. Oh, I know, Luffy said, thinking it over. A musician. Yeah, he had been asking for a musician since I joined, Nami said thinking it over. Funny that the one he wanted most took so long to join. Luffy can be surprisingly picky when he wants to be, Usopp said, thinking it over. Luffy-san, I'm so touched. Brook said tearfully, glad that out of all the musicians in the world, he wanted him to be part of his crew. Ace laughed. Well, I think you get the idea. I'll tell you what, once you get your first bounty, I'll come and meet up with you and your crew. And you'll join? Luffy asked excitedly. Are you kidding me? Ace asked, rolling his eyes, and Luffy looked away disappointed. The Straw Hats laughed. It was too much like how they were always arguing before that they couldn't help themselves. But you'll get to meet my crew when I find them. Luffy asked him, as if making sure that he wouldn't go back on his promise. Only if you promise me that you'll look after yourself till then, Ace said strictly. Okay, Luffy said beaming. Sounds fair. It's a promise. Good, Ace said, before he suddenly shoved Luffy's head down into the dirt and started another fight. So that's why we met up with him in Alabasta? Chopper asked. I think he wanted to see what kind of people would be crazy enough to follow Luffy, Sanji smirked. I often wonder that myself. It was the next morning when the next memory came, and now they were standing near the ocean. Ace was standing in a small fishing boat, finishing packing a sack and swinging it over his shoulder as he looked up at everyone. Luffy, Makino, the bandits, even the mayor were all there to say goodbye. Ace, Luffy called, beaming at him proudly. Take care of yourself. Looks like Ace is finally setting out, Usopp said, feeling strangely honored that he could see such a special moment. Funny how it is now Luffy-san telling his brother to take care of himself, Brook said fondly. Well, Ace is leaving, Sanji said smiling sadly. He's heading off into a world that they know nothing about, he's gonna need it to survive out here. Sure, Ace called happily. See you later, Luffy. I'll be going on ahead. Right, Luffy called eagerly. And when I set out to see myself in 3 years, I'll become much stronger. Don't we know it, Usopp said, thinking back. Ace merely grinned, and it was here that they saw the man they met in Alabasta. This was how it all truly started for him as he shoved off, all of them waving goodbye. Do your best, Ace. Luffy called, waving joyfully, but still a little sadness in his eyes shone through. Take care of yourself, Dagra called, waving a handkerchief after him. Try not to catch cold. Makino added. Still so kind, Makino-san. Sanji swooned, suddenly reminded of the day that he left the Bharati. Just you wait, Ace declared, I'll make a name for myself real soon. That he does, Robin said softly, knowing that he would soon become the feared Fire Fist Ace, in only 3 years. There he goes, Luffy called, grinning as he stared long after his older brother until he was out of sight. Really, the mayor said. How is Garp going to take this? I don't want to be around when he does, Usopp gulped. I'm gonna miss him, Makino sighed, he really has come a long way since I first met him. You're telling me, Chopper said, remembering how cold Ace once was. Hey, wait, he added looking around. Dayton's not here. I guess she couldn't bring herself to say goodbye, Nami said softly. Luffy didn't say a word as he went skipping off on his own. After seeing all the memories of him and Ace together, it was a little lonely to see Luffy by himself now. But he was still smiling as he went along the now familiar path to the old fighting ground. Only 3 more years for me, Luffy said to himself, turning to face the giant rock. He then ran forward with a gum-gum pistol and ended up taking the top of the giant boulder off. He hit it, Chopper called happily. And he's now strong enough to break apart rock with his bare hands, Frankie said with a smirk, about time. But his aim still sucks, Zoro pointed out. Luffy seemed to agree as he cursed to himself and frowned at the rock. He stared ahead, as if imagining something was there. Just aim a little bit lower, Usopp said at once. And as if Luffy heard him, this time when he tried, he ended up hitting the rock dead center and smashing it to pieces. Grinning in pride, he punched the air, loudly declaring to all of Goa, I'll become stronger. Much stronger. And that's how life was for Luffy now that he was on his own. It was hard for him, at first, to train on his own, but he soon got used to it as he went running through the forests, challenging every beast he saw. Only occasionally would he go to Goa, since everyone there knew his face, he couldn't walk the streets without someone crying out and guards coming. But Luffy just laughed as he let the guards chase him, easily slipping through their fingers every time. Now the Straw Hats knew where Luffy learned to become so skillful in escaping from authorities. They thought that they wouldn't see or hear about Ace again until Luffy set out to see himself, however that changed. In only a few months since Ace had left, and Luffy was relaxing in the fort when Dagra came running towards him, waving a newspaper around. Luffy, look at today's paper. What is it? Luffy asked quickly as he stood up. There's only one reason why Dagra would be so excited about a paper, Nami said as Luffy looked at the front page, and sure enough, a large grin appeared. Amazing, he called out, staring at it, beaming with pride. Ace made a name for himself. This picture shows him with his pirate ship and crew. Amazing. Ace is amazing. He dropped the paper as he went running back into the forest. Luffy. Dogra called after him in surprise, "Where are you going? I'm not gonna lose to him." He yelled back, and soon they heard a boom and a giant smoke cloud appeared over the trees as if Luffy had just destroyed something big and heavy. "Look like Ace-san was a big inspiration to him," Brook said softly. "I noticed that too," Sanji said, looking down at his cigarette. Shanks was his childhood hero, but it was really Ace that was like a guiding light for him. Even when he wasn't around, he kept Luffy motivated and determined to grow stronger. So that's how he became the Luffy we all knew when we met him. Usopp sighed, "I'm jealous. I never knew just how close these two were, and that's something really one of a kind. Who knew coming to live here with bandits could shape them into the people we knew?" "I find the change in Ace simply remarkable as well," Robin stated, looking up at the bright sky before the memory changed again. "Now I understand why you were surprised when we first saw him here. You can hardly tell that it's the same person." Without even realizing it, Luffy changed Ace completely, Usopp said smiling. By giving Ace something to look out for, he had a reason to live, Robin said to herself softly. She wondered, what would have happened if Ace never had what happened to Sabo happen? Or if he never had such a wild child like Luffy to look after? Would he have become like her? Bitter and angry with the world, never able to find a place. She smiled. Yes, her captain had unknowingly saved at least 2 lives here without even trying. She wished that she could have met Ace. When the vision came back, they were surprised to be standing in front of the tree where the trio's old hideout was. It looked completely run down, now covered with a thick layer of moss. It couldn't have been clearer that one had been here for a long time. But Luffy was standing there, gazing up at it. His back was to them, but when he turned around so that they could see his face, it was a pleasant surprise to see that this was their Luffy. He was much older here than in the last memory. He was now a swinging 17-year-old looking just like how he did when they met him 2 years ago. The only difference was that he wasn't wearing his straw hat, he just didn't look right without it. Nonetheless, there was a bright light shining in his eyes as he turned away from the treehouse and went running through the forest. Again with running, Usopp sighed as they gave chase. But this was different from before. Luffy almost flew along the ground as he ran, jumping over the crocodile pond, lightly landing down cliffs, and the rest of the monsters who lived here seemed to be afraid to go near him as if thinking that he would eat them, which he probably would. He had certainly come a long way from the little boy who would constantly chase after his big brother. The bright sun was shining and Luffy seemed out of his mind with eagerness. Yo ho ho, he's like the boss of the forest now. Brook laughed. Boss of the island if you ask me, Nami answered, wondering just why got Luffy so happy here. Bursting through the clearing where the bandit's hut was, Luffy stopped by his fort where he'd picked up a few coins to shove in his pocket and his precious straw hat from a tangle of blankets. Standing back and smiling long and hard at the fort he turned and called to the bandits inside, "Hey! Come on." He leaned in the front doorway, so that he could see inside, "I'm going now. Aren't you coming to see me off?" So this is where he's finally ready to set off on his own. Brook called excitedly. "Oh, shut up," Dayton said, her back to him. "Makino and the mayor wouldn't mind. They know us, but we'd scare the other villagers if we came down from the mountain." "Yeah but," Luffy started, looking disappointed that they didn't want to come. "Just get going already," she snapped. "Nice way to say goodbye to someone after all they've been through," Usopp muttered to himself. Luffy sighed. "Oh, well, then guys," he brightened up, nothing could dampen his mood here, "thanks for everything." They all turned red. "Oh, don't embarrass us," Dogra said with an awkward laugh. "No need for thanks. Now, Magra added, rubbing the back of his head as he raised a hand in farewell. "Take care. You know, they aren't so bad after all," Frankie said, smiling at them. "I'd love to have a good party with them when we come here to raise hell for the nobles." "Good idea," Usopp said happily. Luffy only smiled. "Sure, I will." He turned to leave before he stuck his head back in one more time, as if he remembered one last thing to complain about. "Oh, right." They all stopped as he said, "Dayton, I told you that I hate mountain bandits." Luffy, Nami sighed, she had hoped that he would at least learn something from Makino's lessons. "Shut up, you little brat." Dayton called annoyed, but Luffy held his hand up, "But I like you guys." Dayton gasped a little, and she pulled out a handkerchief from her blouse and began crying. "Don't say dumb things like that, and just get lost, damn you." The other bandits merely smiled. "Sheesh, you guys are all so. Why are you crying?" "I'm not crying. She's just like you, Frankie," Chopper said, as the cyborg started to tear up from the touching scene. "Oh, shut up. I'm a real man. I never cry," Frankie sobbed out. Luffy only laughed once more as he went running off, waving goodbye to them all as he raced down the road that he hadn't used since he came to this house the first time. Again, it was exciting to follow him down the pathway that would undoubtedly lead them to the village. The trees grew smaller and spread out farther as they slowly turned to farmlands and soon they could see the familiar windmills in the distance. It was almost a culture shock to see the village again after all this time as Luffy went running down to the town, calling out to the people there. And finally, the moment came. The next stage of memories was when they were standing on the same dock that Luffy once stood on to wave goodbye to Shanks and his crew. It was truly coming full circle because this time, it was Luffy setting out on his own. Luffy was in an old rowboat, and putting in a large barrel that was filled with what looked like apples. He had just closed the lid as he started saying goodbye to what looked like the whole town. I kinda expected him to pack meat, Zoro said. Well, apples would keep a lot longer than meat in this case since you can't cook anything in a tiny boat, Nami said as Luffy turned back to the villagers. Hey, one man called to him. If you're going out to sea, you should take my old fishing boat, Luffy. You'll sink right away if you take that thing. A rowing boat, another said. Come on. Yeah, I have to agree, Frankie said, looking at it. That thing's gonna sink soon. I'm fine with this, Luffy said, shaking holding his arms out wide. I'll start my journey here. It begins now. Typical he would want to start out with that little bathtub, Nami smiled. Shows how far he's come since then, Brook laughed proudly, thinking of the Sunny and how they were now in the new world. This is truly a wondrous thing to see. So this is how our captain started off. And here we are now. Luffy was now facing the sea, and suddenly shouted out, Sabo. Look at me, I'm setting out to sea too. I'm not gonna cry, Usopp said, though tears were filling up. I'm not gonna cry. Luffy had a determined look in his eyes as he whispered to himself, Sabo was first, Ace was second, and now I'm the third to go. But I won't lose. He then cried out at the top of his lungs, wait for me, Ace. I'll catch up to you soon. What are you doing, Luffy? A villager asked as the rest of them all looked at each other completely lost. Shouting and muttering to yourself like that. Is it some good luck charm? That's not it, he answered, turning back to him, holding his fist up proudly. It's a challenge. Who's Ace? Someone asked. No idea, another answered. Wait, they don't know about Ace. Usopp said in surprise as Makino and the mayor both shared a secretive look. Well, if Ace was brought to Dayton as a baby, and if he practically grew up in the mountains, I'm guessing it's reasonable, Sanji offered. Alright, Luffy called happily, waving to them all. I'm going now. He untied the rope, and soon was rowing out as the town waved goodbye. There he goes, Mayor, Makino said sadly, her hands on her hips like how a older sister, or maybe even how a mother would look to see him going off on his own. I'm gonna miss him. Don't worry my dear, Sanji proclaimed to her, once I find the all blue, I will come to you. Wait for me. Just wait for, OWWW. He called as Nami pulled his ear sharply from behind. OOOWW. My ear is attached you know. No more of that, she said firmly as she let go and he rubbed his sore ear. He's a disgrace to the village. Becoming a pirate, the mayor muttered to himself as Chopper said, I wish that Dayton and the boys could be here. They are, Robin giggled softly. Wait, really? Frankie said looking around. I don't see them. Robin merely pointed far behind them to see Dayton, Magra, and Dagra all peeking out from behind a building. I guess they wanted to see him off too. But this is probably better for them. At least they don't have to worry about causing trouble. So touching. Brook sighed happily, now dancing around in a circle. Yes, what a marvelous thing to see here. Yo ho ho. And so this is where the journey officially begins. Yeah, Usopp and Chopper called out happily as they jumped to the sea, and ran out to chase after Luffy for as long as they could before this memory faded. Hey, wait a minute. Nami yelled as Brook and Frankie also joined them. No point in trying to stop them, Sanji smiled, waving goodbye to Makino and some of the other women in the village. But soon the happy waves turned into gasps of terror and a giant roar was coming from beneath their feet. A familiar face suddenly burst out from beneath the sea, the glowing red eyes, long eel-like body of the Sea King that had almost eaten Luffy years before. Is that? Usopp screamed as he and Chopper hugged each other, running back a few feet as the Sea King looked down at Luffy, as if he had been waiting for another chance to eat him. The same Sea King that took Shanks' arm, Brook stated with a cry of shock. Wow, didn't see that coming, Zoro smirked. He doesn't mean any harm, he's just hungry, Sanji added. Can't you be a little worried? Usopp yelled back. Relax, Zoro said, it's not like we're dealing with a defenseless little kid anymore. Watch. Luffy was standing calmly in the little boat and tilted his hat down so that his eyes were covered. So, there you are, Lord of the Coast, he said with a wide smile, glancing up at him, you don't know who you're messing with. Look at my technique. I've been training for 10 years. Luffy threw his arm back and shouted out, Gum Gum, pistol. And it was here that the attack hit the beast perfectly, knocking it with such force that it was knocked out of the sea and fell backwards in the water with an enormous tidal wave. Looks like he's finally got that move right, Sanji smirked. That was amazing, Chopper said, eyes shining. And look at how the crew was created from this. Learned your lesson yet, you dumb fish. Luffy spoke up smugly, but here, he deserved it. Finally, payback for Shanks' arm, it was sweet justice. The villagers from the shore were now cheering and whistling loudly in pride as he gazed out at the sea, tilting his hat back to see that clear, blue sky. First I gotta gather a crew. Luffy said to himself as they joined him on the sea. I'd like to have about 10 people. And then a pirate flag, he beamed at the thought. Alright, here I come. The other Straw Hat were just watching with satisfaction, wondering just what was in store for them all next as Luffy punched the air, and screamed out at the top of his lungs, I'm gonna be the king of the pirates. Luffy. Luffy went running through the thick forest, following Ace closely, as if terrified of losing sight of him. But even after not seeing the middle forest for so long, it was just how he remembered. Ace. Luffy called happily, where are we going? Ace laughed ahead. Come on, Luffy. I know you're slow, but I would have thought you know the way here by now. Onwards they ran until they both came to a stop, both knowing where they were now. Up on the highest tree was the old hideout. It had been years since they had been here, but it brought back so many memories that Luffy couldn't hide the smile as he gazed up at it. But Ace nudged him in the side and pointed at the base of the tree. As Luffy looked, he spotted him. Leaning up against the trunk was a young man, about the same age as Ace. He was also as tall and muscular as Ace, and was still wearing the same attire he wore as a child but made bigger to fit his size, while there was a bow staff attached to his back. He had longer hair, and his eyes were hidden by his hat's brim, looking the same as it always was. As soon as he heard them he looked up, and a familiar pair of eyes shone from under his hat, as the smile he had was beaming at them both. I see you brought him, Ace, he said, standing up, took you long enough. Luffy gaped at him, Sabo, he croaked out, before his eyes shone like stars as he ran forward and embraced his long-lost brother, the tears now back in full as Sabo and Ace grinned at each other over Luffy's head happily. Still a crybaby I see, Sabo teased. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch.